Imagine being the IT guy at the most important peace talk in history, held in a glass bubble floating in space above a stormy planet. The room smelled like new electronics and pure panic. I'm talking about a place so fancy, so over the top, that it was basically the definition of architectural arrogance, hanging there in the void. Below us, the planet Vera was a swirling mess of purple clouds and lightning, looking both gorgeous and deadly, kind of like the alien delegates glaring at us from across the table. My name's Eli Ward, and for the 10th time in 10 minutes, I was fidgeting with the scratchy collar of my dress uniform, a constant, nagging reminder that I was a fish out of water. I'm a systems analyst, a guy who belongs in a dark server room, not a diplomatic showdown. My job is to make sure data flows and reactors don't, melt down. So what was I doing here? Standing behind Ambassador Holloway like some kind of human decoration? You won't believe how this nerdy tech guy gets blamed for the worst disaster in galactic history, so stick around to see what happens. Holloway was putting on that big, toothy smile that people use when they're trying not to scream in terror. He leaned over the shiny black table and said, "We are on the verge of a new era, High Counselor." His voice was booming, all for the benefit of the little camera drones buzzing around us. "The peace engine isn't just a gift," he continued, laying on the charm thick. "It's a promise of safety for your cities and your trade routes." I wasn't listening. My eyes were glued to my data pad, where the energy readings from the so-called peace engine were going nuts. The numbers were jumping all over the place, in patterns that made my skin crawl. I'd already tried to warn Holloway that the power coupling had a 0.3% variance, but he just brushed me off, saying it was within the margin of error. In my world, there's no such thing as a margin of error. There are just equations that work and equations that lead to catastrophe. As my eyes scanned the room, past the Veyron counselors in their glowing robes, my gaze locked onto the guard by the airlock. And wow, you couldn't miss her. Her name was Keith, and even for a Veyron, she was something else. Her people had skin the color of dark slate, but hers looked like it was carved from a block of obsidian that swallowed the light. She was decked out in the ceremonial armor of the Royal Guard, a suit of iridescent black metal that looked both beautiful and deadly. A massive pulse rifle was clipped to her leg, and she was casually leaning on a monofilament glaive, a high-tech spear, like it was just a walking stick. I'd read her file. Everybody had. Keith was a living legend, a war hero who was supposedly genetically engineered from birth to be the perfect warrior. She stood perfectly still, her helmet pulled back to show a face with sharp angles and intense, glowing amber eyes. Those eyes swept the room with a look of boredom that was somehow more terrifying than open hostility. And then, she caught me staring. My heart instantly started beating like a drum solo against my ribs. I was expecting a dirty look, a sneer, anything. Instead, she just locked eyes with me, her gaze dissecting me in a split second. There was no emotion, just a quick calculation, like she was figuring out if I was a threat, deciding I wasn't, and moving on. I quickly looked back down at my pad, my face burning with embarrassment. I felt like a total nobody. "Ladies and gentlemen, humans and Veyrons," Holloway shouted, throwing his hands up like a game show host, "I present to you the demonstration." The peace engine in the middle of the room hummed to life. It was a beautiful device, a sphere of spinning silver rings hovering over a pedestal. As it powered up, the air got thick and crackled with static. The hair on my arms stood on end. The rings spun faster and faster until they looked like a globe of liquid metal. A low hum vibrated up through the floor, a sound you felt in your bones. The light in the room started to bend around the machine as it began to manipulate gravity itself. The whole point of this thing was to calm the violent earthquakes that made the planet below so dangerous. And for a second, it was absolutely magical. The station's heavy artificial gravity lightened up. Champagne floated out of glasses in perfect little bubbles. All the delegates were gasping and pointing. But then I saw it. The energy pattern on my screen flashed from green to solid red. It wasn't just a small problem, it was a feedback loop that was growing out of control. "Shut it down," I whispered, but nobody could hear me over the applause. "Ambassador," I said, stepping forward, completely breaking protocol. "We have to abort. The resonance is unstable." Holloway shot me a furious look. "Sit down, Ward." "You're ruining the moment," he hissed. "It's going to pulse," I yelled, my voice cracking with panic. "It's going to—" The peace engine let out a scream, a sound like 1,000 pieces of metal being torn apart at once. The silver rings locked up, shattered, and then the gravity field flipped inside out like a bomb going off. Pure chaos. The floor was now the ceiling. 300 dignitaries were launched into the air, screaming as they slammed into the diamond glass roof. Tables, chairs, and glasses became deadly missiles. The station's own gravity generators tried to fight back, creating waves of nauseating shifts that twisted the whole room. One second you were falling up, the next you were being slammed sideways. I grabbed onto a metal pole for dear life, my knuckles turning white as alarms blared everywhere. "Security!" Holloway screamed, clinging to the podium which was now somehow bolted to the wall. "This is an attack!" Across the room I saw Keith. She wasn't screaming. She was moving with a terrifying, fluid grace, using the wild gravity shifts to leap across the room, grab a Veyron official, and slam his magnetic boots onto a wall just before the next wave hit. Then the giant screens above us all flashed bright red, and a face appeared. It was my face. Next to my ID picture, lines of computer code were scrolling by, the exact code that had just destroyed the engine. And the authorization signature was right there in plain text. E. Ward. Clearance level 4. "He did it!" Holloway shrieked, pointing a shaky finger right at me. "It's Ward! He sabotaged the core!" I just stared at the screen, a cold pit of horror opening in my stomach. That was my login. That was my signature. But I had never, ever seen that code in my life. "Arrest him!" Holloway roared. Little defense turrets popped down from the ceiling, and a dozen red laser dots painted a target right on my chest. I didn't have time to think. Adrenaline took over. Just as the gravity shifted again, I let go of the pole and fell toward an open service hatch. I hit the metal grating hard, scrambling inside as the door hissed shut just a second before laser blasts melted the spot where I'd been standing. And then I ran. The service tunnels were a nightmare. The station was groaning and creaking, and lights were flickering everywhere, casting creepy, dancing shadows. I had to get to a computer terminal. I had to prove I was being framed. I rounded a corner, slipped on the floor, and ran face first into a solid wall of black armor. A hand clamped around my throat like a steel trap and slammed me against the bulkhead so hard the air shot out of my lungs. I looked up, terrified, into those glowing amber eyes. It was Keith. She held me off the floor with one hand, and in her other, a combat knife buzzed with energy, its tip hovering just an inch from my throat. "I didn't do it," I wheezed, my hands uselessly clawing at her armored glove. Keith just tilted her head, her face impossible to read. "The evidence says otherwise, human," she said. "It was planted," I choked out. Listen to the station." The whole structure shuddered again, a deep rhythmic booming sound echoing all around us. Boom, boom, boom. "It's a Fibonacci sequence," I gasped. "The destabilization pulse. It's not random. It's math." The next gravity shift hits in 4 seconds. 3 and 2. Keith's eyes narrowed. 1, I whispered. The entire corridor lurched 90 degrees. But Keith didn't fall. Her magnetic boots locked onto the new floor, and she held me steady so I didn't smash my head on the ceiling. As the rumbling stopped, she brought the glowing knife even closer. "How did you know the timing?" she growled, her voice a low vibration against my chest. "I analyze systems," I said, my voice shaking. "I see patterns." The code that broke the engine. It had a stutter, a rhythm. I swallowed hard, feeling the heat from the blade on my skin. "And I saw something else," I said, the words tumbling out. On the big screen, for just a split second, hidden under my login, there was a second command script, and it was written in Veyron military hex code. Her grip loosened just a tiny bit, but her eyes were sharper than ever. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a traitor. She was looking at a puzzle. And I knew in that moment I might actually have a chance to survive. Kaith froze, the amber glow in her eyes flickering like a dying candle. "Describe it," she commanded, her voice dangerously low. 3 loops, a recursive bind, and a terminate command ending in the symbol for the red moon, Eli recited, his voice hoarse. She finally let go of his throat, but kept him pinned against the wall with her body. "That's a Royal Guard override protocol," she whispered, mostly to herself. "That's impossible. Only High Command has those." "Someone wanted this to look like I did it," Eli choked out, rubbing his bruised neck. "But they used your people's codes to frame me." Just then, Kaith's comm unit crackled, loud enough for Eli to hear the harsh voice on the other end. "Unit 7 Alpha, status report." Kaith instinctively touched the side of her helmet. "Target acquired. Commander Vrax, I have the saboteur." "Execute him," the voice ordered, cold as the void of space. "Immediate termination. We can't allow a human terrorist to stand trial. It would be an insult to the Crown." Eli's blood ran cold. Kaith's eyes darted from him to the empty air, where the voice seemed to hang. "Commander, the target claims he was framed. The data signature has royal protocols. We should interrogate him." "I gave you an order weapon," Vrax snapped. "Do not think. Do not analyze. Erase the stain. Kill him and get back information." The line went dead. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the corridor. Eli glanced at the knife in her hand, then back at her face. He could see the muscles in her jaw clenching under the clear plates of her helmet. He could almost feel the war going on inside her head, a lifetime of conditioning battling the undeniable truth right in front of her. She was a tool, a weapon, and she'd just been ordered to throw away the most important piece of evidence because it was inconvenient. Eli took a small step back, raising his hands. "You know I'm right," he said gently. "If you kill me, the truth dies with me, and whoever used your codes gets away with everything." Kaith looked at him. I mean, she really looked at him. And for the first time, she didn't see a target. She saw a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. With a sharp metallic click, she slid the knife back into its sheath. "We're leaving," she stated flatly. "Where?" Eli asked, completely stunned. "Away from my unit," she said, grabbing his arm and yanking him toward a maintenance hatch. "Before they realize I've gone rogue." They ran. This time, it was a dizzying blur of terror and physics that shouldn't be possible. Kaith moved with a speed Eli could barely follow. She didn't just run, she flowed through the chaos. She seemed to anticipate the station's gravity shifts, shoving Eli left or right just moments before the floor beneath them would tilt violently. They finally reached the central maintenance spine, a massive vertical shaft 500 meters deep, lined with giant spinning turbines and glowing coolant pipes. In here, gravity was just a suggestion. "We have to jump!" Kaith yelled over the deafening roar of the turbines. "Jump!" Eli looked down into the terrifying, rotating darkness. "That's suicide! Staying here is suicide!" she shot back. She wrapped an arm around his waist, pulled him tight, and kicked off the bulkhead with tremendous force. They plunged into the abyss. The wind screamed in Eli's ears. Debris from the explosion floated past them. Crates, tools, and glittering shards of glass, all tumbling in 0G. They fell for what felt like an eternity. Then the gravity grid surged back to life. Suddenly, down became very, very real. Their speed multiplied, and the landing platform far below rushed up to meet them way too fast. "Brace!" Kaith yelled. She twisted them in midair, positioning her armored body to shield Eli from the impact. She fired a grapple line from her wrist, the cable whining as it snagged an overhead strut. The line snapped taut with a bone-jarring jerk that threw them into a wild arc, sending them smashing through a ventilation grate and into a cramped, dark service alcove. They hit the floor hard, a tangled mess of limbs and metal. Kaith absorbed most of the blow, her armor screeching in protest against the steel deck. Eli scrambled away, gasping for air, his heart pounding like it wanted out of his chest. He was alive. Somehow, he was alive. He looked over at Kaith. She was slumped against the wall, her breathing ragged, as the grapple line hissed and retracted back into her gauntlet. A warning chime echoed from her suit. "Thermal overload. Venting required. Stay back," she rasped. The armor plates along her shoulders and back unlocked with a series of clicks and slid open like the shell of some giant insect. A cloud of superheated steam and the sharp smell of ozone billowed out, instantly filling the tiny space. Eli recoiled, pressing himself into the far corner. Through the swirling vapor, he saw the person beneath the armor for the first time. He'd expected skin like his, maybe scales. What he saw was something raw, powerful, and utterly alien. Her skin was a deep, iridescent violet, glistening with coolant fluid. But it was the scars that made him gasp. A network of luminous, glowing lines crisscrossed her torso and neck, pulsing with a soft, rhythmic light. To his human eyes, conditioned by years of anti-alien propaganda, they looked like open wounds that had never healed. She looked like a monster, something flayed and dangerous. He couldn't help it. A sharp intake of breath, a sound of pure revulsion, escaped his lips. Kaith's head snapped up. She saw the fear on his face. The smirk that touched her lips wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was the look of someone who was used to being the monster in everyone else's story. She leaned forward, the glow from her skin lighting up the darkness. "You're afraid of my body?" she asked, her voice a low rumble of exhaustion and challenge. Eli couldn't find his voice. He just stared at the pulsing lines of light that ran up her neck. She reached out and gently took his chin in her hand. Her fingers were hot against his skin, but she didn't hurt him. She just made him look, really look. "Then look closer," she whispered. Eli did. He forced his analyst brain to take over, to push past the primitive fear. He saw that the lines weren't jagged scars from a whip or a blade. They were perfectly geometric. The light inside them pulsed in sync with her breathing. "They aren't injuries," he breathed, the incredible realization dawning on him. "They're circuits. Bioluminescent vascular shunts." "Correct," Kaith said, releasing his chin. "They dissipate the extreme heat my body generates in combat. Without them, I'd burn up from the inside out." She traced one of the glowing lines on her collarbone with her thumb. "The patterns tell my story, my lineage, my rank, my history. This spiral," she said, tracing it, "and for the defense of the outer rim. This one is for saving a royal heir." Eli stared, his disgust melting away and replaced by a sudden, intense awe. It was biological engineering as a form of art. It was beautiful, in a way that terrified him, because it meant she was literally built for a purpose he could barely imagine. I thought they were torture marks," he admitted quietly. With a soft hiss, Kaith's armor plate slid shut, hiding the light. "That's what your leaders want you to think," she said, getting to her feet and checking her rifle. "It's easier to kill a monster than a person." She held out her hand to him. "Come on, we need to find a ship." Eli looked at her gloved hand, at the deadly strength it represented, but now he also thought of the intricate, glowing map of her life hidden just beneath it. He took her hand. They made their way toward the lower docks. The station was in total chaos now. Alarms blared as sectors went into lockdown. The PA system was broadcasting Eli's name and face on a constant loop, branding him a traitor to the human race. Keith led him to a private courier dock. The ship waiting there was a sleek, needle-nosed vessel, clearly built for speed. "Can you fly this?" Eli asked as they sprinted up the ramp. "I can fly anything with an engine," Keith replied. They scrambled aboard, the airlock sealing behind them just as a squad of Veyron guards stormed the dock, their laser fire pinging uselessly against the hull. Keith threw herself into the pilot's seat, her hands a blur across the controls. "Strap in, human." Eli jumped into the co-pilot's seat and plugged his datapad into the navigation computer. "I'm jamming their tracking lock," he said, his fingers flying across the screen. "But we need a destination. We can't just jump into empty space." Keith slammed the thrusters forward, and the ship surged ahead. The little ship sheared through the dock's magnetic field and blasted out into open space. The orbit around the station was a junkyard of debris from the explosion, a deadly storm of twisted metal and frozen atmosphere. Keith weaved through it with impossible skill, rolling the ship to dodge a spinning solar panel and diving under a massive chunk of hull plating. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the screaming proximity alarms. Eli pulled up the data he'd copied from the peace engine. He overlaid the sabotage code with a star chart. "The sabotage," he said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "It wasn't just to break the engine. It was a ping, a signal meant to locate something." "Locate what?" Keith asked. Eli sent the coordinates to the main view screen. A single red dot pulsed on the dark side of the planet Vera below them. "There," Eli said. "On the surface. An ancient ruin in what they call the dead zone. The signal was designed to wake it up." Keith looked at the coordinates, and her expression grew grim. "That's a forbidden sector," she said. "Under royal quarantine. Someone wanted the peace engine to fail, so they'd have an excuse to go down there," Eli concluded. "Start a war to cover up whatever they're digging for." Keith pushed the throttle to its absolute limit. The G-force slammed them back into their seats as the ship screamed toward the planet's atmosphere. "Then we're going there first," she said. Behind them, the summit station shrank until it was just another star, and the darkness of the planet below rose up to swallow them whole. Our ship died screaming. It ripped a scar of melted glass across the moon's dark side for half a mile before it finally shuddered to a stop. I was hanging upside down, my head pounding, watching little lights dance in my vision. Was this how it was all going to end? For the crime of knowing too much, was I going to die on some forgotten rock at the edge of the galaxy? If you think that's unfair, stick around. From the darkness below me, a calm voice cut through the silence. "Status, operational." It was Keith. She said the landing gear took 80% of the hit. "The hull's breached, but we're in one piece," she said. I watched her unclip her harness and drop to the ceiling with a heavy thud. She looked completely unfazed, which was infuriating. She cut me loose, catching me like I weighed nothing, and set me on my feet. I leaned against the wall, trying not to throw up. "We crashed," I managed to say, stating the obvious because my brain was short-circuiting. "We're stranded on a hostile moon with 2 governments hunting us, and we have no ship." Keith just nodded. "Correct." She blew the emergency airlock, and the door hissed as it hit the sand. "We walk," she said, stepping out into the night. I stumbled after her into a beautiful nightmare. The dunes weren't sand. They were sharp, shimmering glass, glowing under the light of the massive planet in the sky. Silent lightning crawled across the horizon like searching fingers, and the air smelled like a storm. I could feel a constant, deep hum through the soles of my boots. "That's the peace engine," I muttered, pulling my jacket tighter. "The pulse from the attack reached all the way out here. The whole moon is singing with it." Keith checked her rifle and scanned the horizon. "The coordinates are 12 kilometers that way," she said, "straight through the gravity eddies." I just stared at her. "Gravity eddies? That sounds bad." "Treacherous," she corrected. Her helmet speaker crackled for a second. "My deepest desire is for your body to remain pressed against mine." I froze, my heart hammering. "I'm sorry, what?" She tapped her helmet. My universal translator is damaged. I meant to say, maintain tactical proximity. Don't wander off, or you will die a horrible death. Right, I said, feeling my face flush. Tactical proximity. Got it. I started walking beside her, our boots crunching on the glass. I'm a guy who works with computer models in a climate-controlled office. She's a walking weapon who treats mortal danger like a minor inconvenience. The silence was getting to me. So, I started, just to hear a voice. That translator thing, does it happen a lot? Only under extreme stress, Keith said without looking at me. The language algorithms default to intimate syntax. I blinked. Intimate syntax? Old High-Viren, she explained. It's a language for oaths and courtship. It doesn't really have words for professional distance. In my language, you don't say, I will protect you. You say, I offer my blood in place of your breath. I glanced at her armored silhouette against the purple sky. Wow, that's intense. It's efficient, she shot back. Why use 10 words when one will do? Just then, the ground vanished from under my feet. 1 second I was walking, the next I was falling. Up, toward the stars. Whoa! I yelled, waving my arms like an idiot, but Keith moved like lightning. She slammed her magnetic boots to the ground, anchoring herself, and snatched my ankle just as I was about to float away. She yanked me back down with surprising force. Gravity Eddy, she said, her voice perfectly calm. The mass shadows are unstable here. You have to walk heavy. Walk heavy? I squeaked, grabbing her arm. I'm 160 pounds. I can't just decide to be heavier. It's not about mass, she said, her amber eyes glowing in the dark. It's about intent. You walk like you're sorry for touching the ground. You need to walk like you own it. She took a heavy, deliberate step, crunching the glass. I tried to copy her, stomping my feet like a child. I felt like a total fool. Better? I asked. Your clumsiness is a strange comfort to my heart, her translator crackled. I groaned. You mean I'm a liability, don't you? A tiny smile touched her lips. Yes, that is what I meant. We kept going, and the eddies got worse. 1 minute I felt like I weighed 1,000 pounds. The next I was practically floating. During a break, Keith took off her helmet to drink. I noticed the glowing scars on her neck pulsing with a soft light. I couldn't help but stare. Does it ever bother you? I asked quietly. The way people look at you? She wiped her mouth. You mean with fear? The fear, I admitted. And the other thing. The way they look at you like you're not a person, but a thing, a statue, a tank. She stared out at the silent lightning for a long moment. I was bred for this, she said, her voice completely flat. My genes were selected. My training began before I could talk. To my people, I'm not a person. I'm a symbol. A flag. I'm the sharp, pretty edge of the crown's power. She turned a nutrient flask over in her hands. They call me beautiful, but they mean useful. They admire the armor because it protects them. They don't give a damn about the woman inside, unless she's bleeding. I looked at my own hands, soft, unscarred, and shaking. I get that, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Do you? You move numbers around on a screen. I'm the guy who makes the numbers work so the heroes on stage look brilliant, I said. I'm the one who fixed the trade routes that got my boss promoted. I designed the security grid that keeps everyone safe. But when something goes wrong, I'm the rounding error, the disposable variable. I picked up a piece of glass and tossed it into the air, watching it float away. I spent my whole life terrified of breaking the rules, because I knew if I ever stepped out of line, no one would even bother looking for me. The rules were supposed to keep me safe. I gave a bitter laugh. And look where that got me. Keith just looked at me, all the humor gone from her face. So we're a pair, she said, and this time the translator didn't glitch at all. The weapon everyone fears, and the tool nobody values. Those words just hung there in the cold air, like a bridge suddenly appearing between us. An hour later, we found it. A perfect geometric wound in the side of a mountain, framed by metal that never rusted. The entrance was a massive black door covered in strange, spiraling patterns. As I got closer to the control panel, amber lights glowed to life under the dust. "This is ancient," I whispered, wiping it clean. "It's biological, not digital." My datapad beeped. "It needs a key," I said. "What kind?" Keith asked, right behind me. I stared at the readings, completely bewildered. 2 keys, at the same time. One is a neural handshake. It needs a human brainwave pattern. Logic, pattern recognition, us. "And the second?" she asked. "Thermal resonance," I said, looking up at her. "Specifically, the kind of high-output biological heat generated by a Veyron under stress." We just looked at each other, the reality of it slowly sinking in. "It was designed for us," Keith said, her voice full of awe. "Not just you and me, but for our 2 species, to work together." But that was impossible. Humans and Veyron had only met 20 years ago. This place was thousands of years old. "We've been here before," I breathed. I placed my hand on the left side of the panel. It was cool and smooth. Keith put her hand on the right. The stone hissed as the heat from her body connected with the ancient sensors. With a deep groan, the massive door split down the middle and slid open. Together, the weapon and the tool, the forgotten and the feared, we stepped out of the darkness and into our shared history. Imagine being framed for a crime that could shatter galaxies, and the only person who can clear your name is an 8-foot-tall alien warrior who thinks you're as useful as a screen door on a spaceship. That was my life. My name is Eli, and I was about to face the darkest parts of myself, literally. We were in a hallway lined with shimmering mirrors, but they didn't show our reflections. To my left, I saw an older version of me, dressed in a sharp suit, signing away a planet's food supply with a cold, satisfied smile. It made my stomach turn. What kind of monster could I become? If you saw your worst possible future, would you have the guts to change it? Let me know in the comments. I looked over at my partner, Caleb. She was a Vin's warrior, built like a walking tank, and usually covered head to toe in armor. But in her reflection, she was sitting on a throne made of bones, a twisted crown fused to her head, her hands stained deep red. An entire crowd was bowing to her, not in respect, but in pure terror. "What is this place?" she whispered, her hand instinctively going to her weapon. "It's showing us possibilities," I said, my voice trembling. "Who we could become, if we make the wrong choices." Her reflection smirked, whispering, "You could have all the power. No one would ever hurt you again." We had to get out of there. We pushed forward, ignoring the twisted promises from the glass, and burst into a huge, circular room. In the center, a shimmering holographic map of the galaxy was spinning. This was it, the core of the ancient ruin. But our path was blocked by a transparent wall of energy. There was no keypad, no handle, just a single glowing sensor in the middle. I pulled out my scanner. "It's a synchronization lock," I explained. "It reads your heartbeat, your breathing. It's looking for calm." Caleb scoffed. "Calm? We're being hunted by killers. Calm isn't exactly on the menu." "Not just calm," I corrected, reading the screen. "Synchronization. It needs 2 heartbeats, perfectly in time, beating as one." Caleb looked at me, then at the shimmering gate. "A safety measure," she realized. "To make sure no one comes in here alone, or fighting with their partner." She was right. I stepped up to the gate and took a deep breath, trying to will my heart to slow down. It was no use. "My heart rate is 120. I said, defeated. "I'm too scared." That's when she stepped behind me. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there. a warm, solid presence at my back. "Focus on me," she said softly. She gently took my hand and placed it flat against her chest plate. Even through the armor, I could feel it. The deep, steady rhythm of her two hearts beating in a powerful, complex rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. "Match me," she said. It wasn't an order. It was an invitation. I closed my eyes and focused everything I had on that feeling. The warmth of her body, the quiet sound of her breathing. I breathed in when she did, and out when she did. Her other hand came to rest on my shoulder, its weight grounding me. "You are not that man in the mirror," she murmured, her voice a low vibration against my palm. "And you," I whispered back, "are not that monster on the throne." For a second, the danger, the ruins, all of it just melted away. There was only the steady beat of her hearts, and the feeling that, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't completely alone. I felt my own frantic heartbeat begin to slow, falling into lockstep with hers. The chaotic spikes of my fear smoothed out, aligning with her powerful, steady rhythm. The energy field in front of us hummed, its angry red glow softening to a welcoming blue. Then, with a sound like a single, perfect bell, it vanished. We stepped through, our hands still connected, and found ourselves in front of the main console. I reluctantly pulled my hand away, already missing the warmth. As my fingers flew across the ancient terminal, the truth spilled onto the screen. "Oh no," I breathed. "This isn't a peace engine." "What is it?" Caleb asked, her eyes scanning the tunnel we'd just come from. "It's a governance weapon," I said, a wave of horror washing over me. "It was designed to stabilize entire civilizations by freezing them. It stops change. It stops new ideas, stops rebellion, stops everything. It turns a society into a perfectly ordered, perfectly controlled prison." Just then, figures emerged from the mirror hallway. At the lead was Commander Vrax, a decorated Vin's warrior, followed by his royal guard. But with them were human soldiers in black tactical gear. "Impressive!" Vrax boomed, his voice echoing in the chamber as he aimed a massive plasma cannon at us. "We've been trying to get through that gate for 5 years." "Vrax, you're working with humans?" Caleb's voice was sharp with betrayal. Vrax laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I work with visionaries. The Human Council understands what our weak leaders do not. Freedom is messy. True peace requires control." He raised his hand. "The traitor Caleb has been corrupted. She stands in the way of progress. Take them both out." "Move!" Caleb yelled, shoving me behind a thick pillar as the air exploded with laser fire. She moved like a force of nature, not just shooting back, but using the pillars to bounce her shots around corners, taking out soldiers who thought they were safe. She was incredible. I, on the other hand, was huddled behind a rock, which was rapidly being chipped away by enemy fire. I couldn't fight, but I could think. My eyes darted from the console to the mirror hallway where more soldiers were pouring in. I had an idea. "Caleb, keep them in the hallway!" I yelled, tapping furiously at the console. I wasn't a soldier, but I was a master architect. I found the environmental controls for the mirror hall. "Reconfigure now!" I shouted, slamming my hand on the holographic key. The hallway twisted violently. The floor tilted to a 45-degree angle, and the mirrors began to spin, creating a dizzying, disorienting nightmare. Soldiers screamed as they were thrown into walls or dropped into pits that suddenly opened beneath them. It bought us a few precious seconds. "There's a maintenance shaft behind the console," I pointed. We sprinted for it. A sniper, anchored to the ceiling, fired a single, heat-seeking round. It curved around the pillar, heading straight for my chest. I saw it coming, but I was frozen. I was too slow, but Caleb wasn't. She launched herself in front of me. The bullet hit her in the side with a sickening thud, punching right through a weaker spot in her armor. She grunted in pain, but her momentum carried us both tumbling into the dark shaft. As we slid down, I saw her violet blood splash against the ancient walls. The moment her blood touched the runes, they flared with a blinding light. "Bonded ally designated!" A mechanical voice echoed through the shaft as a heavy blast door slammed shut above us, sealing off the gunfire. We tumbled out into a cavern lit by glowing green moss. Caleb hit the ground and didn't move. I scrambled over to her. Her breathing was shallow, and the wound in her side was bubbling. "Get the kit!" she gasped, pointing to her belt. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the pouch. Inside were strange tools and vials of glowing liquid. "What do I do?" I said, my voice cracking with panic. "Cauterize," she gritted out. "The blue vial. Pour it in, then use the staple gun." I stared at the horrifying wound. She wanted me to pour acid into her body. "I can't," I whispered. "Do it, Eli," she roared, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "Or I'm gone in 2 minutes." I swallowed hard, popped the seal on the vial, and poured. Caleb let out a scream that tore right through me, a raw sound of pure agony. When the smoke cleared, she was limp, but her eyes were still open. I grabbed the medical stapler and, reciting multiplication tables to keep from passing out, pinched the wound shut and pulled the trigger. Click hiss, click hiss. When I was done, I sat back, covered in her blood. Her breathing was slow and steady now. "Not bad," she whispered, a faint smile on her lips. And in that moment, I knew Vrax had made a huge mistake. He hadn't just made an enemy of a warrior, he had made an enemy of us. And we were going to make him pay. He reached for a fresh cloth from the medkit. For a heartbeat, he paused, then began to gently wipe the blood from the edges of her armor. He cleaned the gash on her side first, then his eyes drifted up to her ribcage, where the attack had exposed the glowing lines etched into her skin. Up close, in the hush of the cave, they weren't scars. They were a work of art, a living map of everything she'd survived. He found himself tracing one of the lines with the cloth, his touch as light as a breath. Kaith just watched him, her usual defenses gone, stripped away by the pain and the fever. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You had your chance to run when I went down." Eli finally looked her in the eye, seeing the person, not the propaganda. "Because you're the one who caught me," he said simply. After he cleaned the last of the blood from her wound, the reality of their situation settled in. "We're in this together now," Eli said softly. "Both of us. They're trying to start a war, and that engine is the leash they want to put on the entire galaxy." Kaith grunted, trying to push herself up. "We have to get into that data drive," she winced. "We need to break the encryption on those files we took." "I might know a place," Eli said, helping her lean back against the cool rock of the cave wall. "It's a long shot. A station called Latch Point." "The smuggler's den?" Kaith asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "That place is a pit." "It's also the only place the Alliance and the Veyron Crown have no control," Eli countered. "And I know a broker there, assuming we can make it that far without murdering each other." Kaith looked at him, and the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. The translator in her ear gave a soft hum. "My heart possesses the capacity for endurance, should you provide the necessary vectors," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. Eli couldn't help but smile. "I think you mean, I can make it if you lead the way." Kaith closed her eyes, letting her head rest against the stone. "That is what I stated, human. That is what I stated." Latchpoint Station wasn't so much built as it was, accumulated. It drifted in the terminus belt like a massive, tangled ball of cosmic junk. It was a chaotic mess of old ship hulls, scavenged engines, and pressurized habitats all welded together by desperation and greed. A true graveyard of ships that had simply refused to die, now home to everyone the galaxy wanted to forget. The moment Eli Ward stepped off the courier shuttle, The smell hit him like a physical blow. It was a thick, suffocating cocktail of recycled air, sizzling oil, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of ozone. The noise was a solid wall of sound, a dozen different languages all shouting over the constant, illegal hum of jury-rigged fusion generators. "Stay close," Keith murmured, her voice easily cutting through the chaos. "And try to look less like a tourist who just got his wallet stolen." Eli tugged at his jacket, trying to hide the scorch mark on his shoulder. "I'm not a tourist. I'm a fugitive. There's a difference." "To the sharks in this water?" she shot back. "The only difference is how quickly you bleed." She moved through the crowd with a natural grace that Eli deeply envied. Out here, surrounded by smugglers and exiles, Keith didn't look like a monster. She just looked like another dangerous piece in a very dangerous game. A heavy-lifting droid with 4 arms shoved past them, carrying a crate overflowing with what looked like black market cybernetic limbs. A few feet away, a group of methane breathers in bulky encounter suits were haggling over a canister of pressurized gas. Eli's attention was caught by a stall selling what looked like memories, swirling like smoke inside glass vials. He leaned closer, fascinated by the shimmering vapor. "Don't even think about it," Keith said, her hand suddenly clamping down on his wrist. "Why not?" Eli asked. "Is it radioactive?" "It's a neuroparasite," she said, pulling him away from the stall. "It lets you live the memory, but it consumes 2 of your own as payment." "Bad trade," Eli shuddered, yanking his arm back. He stumbled backward, bumping hard into a towering reptilian mercenary who was wearing a bandolier of thermal detonators. The mercenary let out a low hiss, his slitted pupils narrowing to pinpricks as his hand dropped to the massive, serrated knife at his belt. "Watch it, soft skin," the creature growled. Eli's mouth went dry. His brain screamed at him to apologize, but some primal part of him knew that apologizing to this thing would be like apologizing to a shark. Before he could say a word, a black armored gauntlet rested gently on the mercenary's chest. Keith had stepped between them, not with aggression, but with a terrifying sort of casual confidence. Her helmet was retracted, and she smiled, a smile that was all teeth. "He's not soft," she purred, her voice low and full of menace. "He's mine, and I get very territorial about my property." The mercenary's eyes flickered from Eli to the glowing scars on Keith's neck, and finally to the pulse rifle locked to her thigh. The calculation was simple. "My mistake," the mercenary grunted, taking a quick step back before melting into the crowd. Eli let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 10 seconds. "Property?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Keith just guided him toward a neon-drenched alley, her hand resting on the small of his back. The warmth of her palm soaked through his jacket, a strange anchor in the chaos. "Would you have preferred I let him skin you?" she asked, glancing down at him with a spark of amusement in her amber eyes. "Besides," she continued, "it makes things simpler. On Latch Point, you're either a predator or you're prey. If you're with me, they just assume you're the predator's pet. It keeps you from becoming a target." Eli frowned, though he didn't pull away from her touch. "I'm not sure being a pet is much of an upgrade." "Pets get fed," Keith said simply. "Come on. The broker's this way." They walked through a part of the station carved out of the upside-down hull of an old luxury liner. The corridors were lined with the ghostly remains of rotted velvet and fixtures where gold had been stripped away, leaving only skeletal frames behind. They stopped in front of a heavy blast door covered in glowing graffiti. Keith rapped out a specific rhythm on the metal. A small viewport slid open. A single, whirring, mechanical eye focused on them. "Keith of the High Guard," a synthesized voice chirped. "And a human accessory. How lovely." "Open the door, Jax," Keith said, her voice flat. The door hissed open, revealing a room that was a chaotic mess of tangled cables, humming cooling fans, and dozens of screens. Floating in the middle of it all, suspended in a gravity chair, was Jax. They were a Cygnian, a species that looked like a bizarre cross between a lemur and a squid, with long, delicate fingers that never stopped moving and enormous, wet eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Jax spun their chair around with a grin. "The royal knife!" they exclaimed, spreading 4 arms wide. "And the fugitive analyst! Your wanted posters are fetching 50,000 credits apiece right now, you know? We're not here to turn ourselves in," Eli said, stepping forward. "We need data decrypted." Jax let out a giggle that sounded like shattering glass. "Right to business. No foreplay at all. I like him, Keith. He positively vibrates with anxiety. It's delicious." "Can you do it?" Keith asked, leaning against a stack of humming servers, the picture of boredom. Jax tapped a sharp claw against their chin. The sabotage signature from the peace engine. Tricky. That's royal encryption with a human military cipher layered on top. Nasty business. It would probably burn out 3 of my processors. "Name your price," Eli said quickly. "We have credits. We can transfer whatever you want." Jax waved a dismissive hand. "Credits are so boring, just numbers." "I have more than enough numbers. I want something real." Jax leaned forward, their mechanical eyes zooming in on Eli. "A memory token," Jax whispered. Eli blinked. "A what?" "A raw, emotional imprint," Jax explained, "pulled directly from the neural cortex. One pure moment of feeling. Fear, love, rage. The stronger the better. I'm a collector. They're like fine wine." Eli instinctively took a step back. "You want to dig around in my brain?" "It's painless," Jax promised with a grin. "Mostly." "I can't," Eli said, shaking his head. "My memories, they're private." "Then you can leave," Jax said, spinning their chair away from them. "No token, no decryption." Keith pushed herself off the server stack. She walked over to a worn-out interface chair sitting in the corner of the room. "Take one of mine," she said. Eli whipped around to face her. "Keith, no. You have no idea what that thing could do." Jax spun back around, their huge eyes wide with glee. "A memory from a royal guard? Oh, that is a rare vintage. That's top shelf." Keith sat down in the chair and looked right at Eli, her expression perfectly calm. "It's just data, Eli," she said. "It's your life," he argued. "You told me yourself they used you. Your memories are the only thing that are truly yours. You can't just trade them away like money." Keith plugged the neural jack into the port at the base of her skull. "Emotions aren't a weakness, human," she said softly, "and hoarding them isn't strength. If giving up one single moment can save us, then it's a bargain." She gave Jax a sharp nod. "Do it!" Jax typed a single command. The machine whined to life. Keith went rigid, her back arching and her teeth clenched tight. The scar lines all over her body flared with a brilliant white light, flooding the dark room for a moment. It was over in 5 seconds. Keith slumped forward, gasping for air. Jax carefully removed a glowing blue crystal from the machine and held it up to the light, admiring it. "Oh, this is exquisite," Jax whispered. "The precise moment you realized you were utterly alone in the universe. Such beautiful sorrow, truly gourmet." Keith wiped a thin line of violet blood from her nose and unsteadily got to her feet. "The deal is done," she rasped. "Decode the file." Looking completely satisfied, Jax slotted the crystal into a velvet pouch and turned to their main console. He slid the data drive Eli had stolen into a port. "All right, let's see what really blew up the peace talks," Jax muttered. Screens around them burst to life with falling lines of code, red intersecting with blue. "And here we are," Jax announced. "The trigger signal. It was sent from 2 sources at the exact same time. Source 1, the royal flagship Sovereign. Command codes authorized by High Commander Vrax." "I knew it," Keith whispered, her voice tight with fury. Jax kept reading. "Source 2, a secure terminal on the orbital summit station, authorized by Supervisor Vance." Eli felt the blood rush from his face. "Vance?" he said, his voice an empty echo. "My supervisor. The man who hired me. The man who taught me how to find the patterns." He collapsed onto a shipping crate, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. "He didn't just frame me," Eli whispered, the realization dawning. "He groomed me." They had put him in the perfect position, given him all the right access, and just waited for the right moment to set him on fire. To them, he wasn't an analyst. He was just the fuse. Caleb rested a heavy, grounding hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll make them regret ever lighting it," she said, her voice like steel. Jax pointed to the screen. "There's more. The sabotage wasn't just to kick off a war. It was designed to trigger a level 0 emergency protocol." "What's that mean?" Calith asked. "It means martial law, galaxy-wide," Jax explained. "The treaty says if the peace engine is taken out by terrorists, an emergency authority gets temporary control over every trade route and all energy production." "Temporary?" Eli snorted. "There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government fix." "They want to seize the lanes," Calith realized. "The Royals, the Human Council, they're manufacturing a crisis to pull off a total power grab." "They don't want peace," Eli said, looking up. "They want absolute control, and we're the only ones who can prove it was all a lie." Jax pulled a small data drive from the console. "I've cracked the encryption key for the master file, but to get the archive, the real proof you need, you have to get inside the deep storage vault in the red sector." "The red sector?" Calith's brow furrowed. "That's the pleasure district. It's off limits unless you have high clearance guild membership." A small grin touched Jax's lips. "Or couples, bonded pairs, get an automatic pass to the private VIP suites, suites that just happen to share a power grid with the vault." Eli glanced at Calith. "Bonded pairs." Calith met his gaze without a hint of hesitation. "We can improvise," she stated flatly. Leaving Jax's den, they felt the crushing weight of the conspiracy settle on their shoulders. The red sector was a different world. The lights were softer, casting everything in a hazy glow, and the air was thick with the scent of synthetic pheromones. A deep, pulsing bass seemed to sync up with your heartbeat. A massive, multi-limbed insectoid with glistening pink armor blocked their path at the checkpoint. "Membership," the gatekeeper clicked in a series of sharp tones. "We're together," Eli said, trying to inject a confidence he didn't feel into his voice. The gatekeeper's compound eyes stared them down. "A human stray and a Veyron war husk. Unlikely. Show me the bond." Eli's blood ran cold. He had no idea what a bond was even supposed to look like. But Calith moved. She stepped right into his personal space, closing the gap between them in an instant. Her hands came up to cup his face, her thumbs gently tracing the line of his cheekbones. "Just play along," she breathed, her voice low and husky, just loud enough for the gatekeeper to hear. She pulled him closer until their foreheads touched. "Don't you dare tremble," she murmured, her lips brushing against his ear. "You're mine. So act like it." Eli's heart was hammering against his ribs. He could smell her scent, like ozone after a storm, mixed with something spicy like cinnamon and hot steel. He placed his hands on her waist, the cool metal of her armor a stark contrast to the heat rising in him. She tilted her head, looking back at the gatekeeper over her shoulder. Then she reached up and unlatched the armor plate covering her collarbone. With a soft hiss of depressurizing air, she pulled it away, revealing the vulnerable, dark violet skin underneath. A bioluminescent scar pulsed with faint light, running from the base of her throat down to her heart. For a Veyron, showing your scars was the ultimate act of trust. It was turning intimacy into a weapon. "He soothes the burn," Calith said, her voice a dangerous cocktail of defiance and possession. "Does that answer your question?" The gatekeeper clicked its mandibles, clearly flustered by the raw display of vulnerability. Pass. Pass. Quickly. They rushed through the gate and ducked into the first private booth they saw. The door slid shut, silencing the noise of the district. The booth was tiny, almost entirely taken up by a low-slung couch. The walls were completely soundproof. Kalith didn't move away. She just stood there, the heavy armor plate still in her hand, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The scar on her chest pulsed in a fast, chaotic rhythm. That was convincing, Eli managed to say, his voice a little shaky. Kalith finally looked at him, her eyes dark and her pupils wide. Was it? She asked softly. She tossed the armor plate onto the couch with a heavy thud, looking suddenly exhausted. The performance had clearly taken something out of her. You're shaking again, she observed. It's not from fear this time, Eli admitted. His gaze was fixed on her exposed skin, on that living line of light that was part of her very biology. He had a sudden, sharp urge to touch it. The desire was a real ache in his chest, but he kept his hands clenched at his sides. I don't want to be another person who just takes something from you, Eli said quietly. You've been used enough by everyone. Kalith watched him for a long moment. She saw the battle in his eyes, the respect fighting against the raw want. She took a step closer. The choice is yours, she said, her voice steady. You ask. I decide. Eli swallowed hard. Can I touch the mark? In response, Kalith lifted her chin, exposing her throat. Yes. Eli reached out a hand. His fingers were trembling, but the second they made contact with her skin, a strange calm settled over him. Her skin was incredibly warm and much softer than he'd imagined. He traced the glowing line of the scar, feeling the faint pulse of energy under his fingertips. It felt like touching the live wire, humming with a quiet power. A long, shuddering breath escaped Kalith's lips. Her eyes fluttered closed. You see, she whispered. In here, it's not a weapon. It's just me. Eli moved his hand lower, resting his palm over her heart. He could feel its yunk double-beat rhythm, strong and fast beneath his hand. I see you, Kalith, he said. Not the soldier, not the guard, just you. For a single, perfect moment, the rest of the galaxy ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of her skin and the raw honesty between them. It was a promise made without a single word, a contract signed with a shared breath and a steady pulse. Then, the comms unit on Eli's belt beeped, shattering the fragile peace. A text message from Jax glowed on the tiny screen. Sorry, kids. Commander Vrax offered to wipe my debt. Nothing personal, just business. At that exact moment, alarms shrieked to life all over the station. Kalith's eyes snapped open, the softness gone in an instant, replaced by the hardened warrior. She snatched her armor plate from the couch and slammed it back into place with a violent, metallic click. We're burned, she hissed. The door to their booth didn't open. It exploded inward. Kalith tackled Eli, shoving him to the floor as a searing plasma bolt flashed through the air where his head had just been. She came up firing, her rifle's roar deafening in the small space. Move, she yelled. They scrambled out of the ruined booth and into a corridor filled with chaos. The red sector was a nightmare of screaming, running patrons. A squad of royal guards, led by Commander Vrax himself, was forcing its way through the panicked crowd, firing indiscriminately. We can't get back to the docks, Eli yelled over the roar. They'll have it completely locked down. Then we go up, Kalith shouted back, taking command. To the gravity spires. They sprinted through the neon-drenched bazaar, crashing through merchant stalls to clear a path. Kalith was a whirlwind of controlled violence. She shot the lock on a blast door, sealing it behind them, then spun around to pistol whip a mercenary who got too close. But there were too many of them. They were being boxed in, herded like animals. They burst out into a huge central plaza, a hollowed-out cargo bay that housed the station's gravity hub. In the center of the massive room, a giant gyroscope spun, regulating the artificial gravity for the whole station. Vrax and his squad appeared on a gantry high above them. "End of the line, traitors!" Vrax bellowed, as a dozen red laser sights painted targets all over Calith's armor. Eli's eyes darted from the massive gyroscope to a nearby control terminal. "Calith, cover me!" he yelled, and dove for the terminal. "What are you doing?" she shouted, dropping behind a crate and unleashing a volley of suppressive fire. "I'm changing the rules of the game!" Eli screamed back. He slammed his hands on the console, hacking into the gravity controller. It was a messy, jury-rigged system, but Eli knew how to break things. He bypassed the safety limiters one by one. Then he inverted the local polarity for the entire plaza. "Grab onto something!" he screamed, and slammed the execute button. One moment there was gravity. The next it was gone. Then it violently reversed. The guards on the gantry shrieked as they were ripped from their feet and flung upward, slamming into the ceiling. Crates, debris, and terrified bystanders began to float aimlessly. Eli wrapped his legs around the base of the terminal to hold on. Calith fired her grapple line, anchoring herself to the floor plating. "Now!" Eli yelled. He manipulated the gravity grid, creating a narrow tunnel of pure zero-G that led straight to an upper maintenance hatch, while the rest of the room was crushed under heavy gravity. It was a shield made of pure physics. The guards' laser shots bent wildly as they passed through the distorted fields. They pulled themselves along the zero-G corridor, practically swimming through the air. Clamped to a railing with magnetic boots, Vrax watched them escape. He raised his heavy cannon, taking careful aim at Calith's exposed back. He had the shot. It was perfect. Calith looked back and saw him. She saw him hesitate. "Shoot, Vrax!" she challenged, her voice ringing out. "Do your duty!" Vrax slowly lowered the cannon, his face pale. "It's not just the crown, Calith!" he shouted, his voice sounding thin and desperate in the chaotic room. "The Council of Balance! They're watching all of us. If I kill you, they'll just replace me too. Run! Run before they decide to purge us both!" Calith just stared at him, shock washing over her. Vrax, the unshakable hammer of the royal family, was terrified. "We have to go," Eli urged, tugging at her arm. They scrambled through the maintenance hatch and slammed it shut. Calith slumped against the metal wall, breathing hard. "The Council of Balance," she repeated, the name tasting like poison. "He's terrified of them. He actually let us go," Eli said, connecting the dots. "This is bigger than just a coup. It's a shadow government." "And I was built to serve it," Calith said, her voice filled with bitterness. "My entire life, every drill, every single scar, it was all just quality control for their product." She punched the wall, leaving a deep dent in the metal. "I am going to burn it all down. And I'll help you strike the match," Eli promised. "But first, we need a ship." They found one in a derelict hangar at the very top of the spire. It wasn't a machine of metal and glass. It looked like it had been grown. The vessel was shaped like a giant seed pod, its hull a matte, organic black that seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm. It was a bioship, one of the rare, semi-sentient crafts flown by the deep space nomads. "There are no controls," Eli said, circling the strange craft. "No joystick, no keypad, nothing." "It doesn't use them," Caleb replied. "It runs on neurochemical signals. It flies on pure emotion." She stepped forward, placing a hand on the hull, which was warm and pulsed with a faint, steady beat. "Open," she thought, not speaking a word, but pushing the command with her mind. The ship seemed to shiver, and a section of its side dissolved like smoke, revealing an entrance. "It seems to like you," Eli observed. "It likes that I'm furious," she corrected. "It feeds on intense feelings." They climbed inside. The interior was soft, and the walls hummed with a low, comforting vibration. Instead of seats, there were just dips in the floor that shifted to perfectly fit their bodies. Eli settled into one, a little uneasy, as the floor molded around him like a warm gel. Hello?" he whispered. The ship gave no response. "It doesn't know you yet," Caleb said, sinking into the pilot's depression. "You have to project. Don't think about coordinates. Think about being safe. Think about getting far away from here." Eli shut his eyes and tried to project a feeling of safety. He pictured his childhood bedroom. He imagined spreadsheets where every single column balanced perfectly. The ship let out a low, unhappy rumble, and the lights inside dimmed. "It thinks you're boring," Caleb interpreted, a small smile playing on her lips. Eli scowled. "Fine, try this." He focused on the moment they first met. He thought about the warmth of Caleb's skin against his. He thought about the terrifying, thrilling decision he'd made to trust her completely, and he thought about their shared promise to burn the whole system to the ground. The ship began to purr. The walls warmed to a soft, golden glow. Acceptable, the ship seemed to communicate. "We're cleared for takeoff," Caleb announced, her eyes going distant as she connected with the ship's senses. "I can feel the engines. They're hungry." "So where are we going?" Eli asked. "The trade routes are blockaded. The military lanes are crawling with patrols." Caleb smiled, and it was the grin of someone who had survived the impossible. "We're going where the maps don't work," she said. The ship didn't roar to life. It surged forward with a silent, incredible leap of power. They shot out of the hangar, blowing past the station's confused defense turrets. Caleb steered them away from the familiar stars, pointing the nose towards a patch of space that looked like a bruised, rotting plum, a swirling mess of dark gas and twisted light. "The Forbidden Corridor," Eli whispered in awe. "They say ships go in there and forget the way out." "Then we'll just have to have better memories than they did," Caleb shot back. She reached over and took Eli's hand. The ship amplified the contact, sending a wave of shared reassurance through its very structure. "Navigation in there isn't about physics," she said. "Eli, it's about your intention. We're not flying with math. We're flying with our truth." "What is our truth?" Eli asked, holding her hand tightly as the inky blackness swallowed the last of the stars. "That we're still alive," Caleb answered. The ship plunged into the nebula, vanishing from the screens of the fleet chasing them, leaving behind nothing but a faint ripple in the darkness. The organic hull of their bioship hummed with a vibration that felt less like an engine and more like a purring cat the size of a battlecruiser. It was a feeling that went straight to the marrow in Eli Ward's bones, a constant, living reminder of their bizarre situation. The ship, which Caleb had started calling Resonance, didn't have a steering wheel or a throttle. It had a mood, and that mood was currently tied directly to the emotional state of its passengers. When Eli and Caleb were calm, breathing in sync, the flight was perfectly smooth. The walls would glow with a soft amber contentment, but the second their tension spiked, which happened a lot, the ship would react. "I'm telling you, the navigation has to have a constant variable," Eli insisted, pacing around the small, fleshy command center. "We can't just feel our way around a black hole. We need actual vectors." The ship lurched violently. The floor rippled beneath him, sending Eli stumbling. The lights flickered from warm amber to a sick, irritated green. "You're upsetting her," Caleb said from the pilot's seat, her eyes still closed. "I'm upsetting the ship?" Eli sputtered, catching his balance. "You're the one projecting pure aggression. I can feel it coming off you like heat." "I'm projecting focus," Caleb corrected, opening one eye to glare at him. "You're projecting panic. Resonance doesn't like panic. To the neural interface, it tastes like sour milk." Eli threw his hands in the air. "It's a biological vessel. It shouldn't have taste preferences." The ship groaned, a deep tectonic sound of disapproval. A sharp shudder rattled the walls, knocking a data pad off a ledge. "Fine, Eli yelled at the ceiling. "I'm sorry, you're a magnificent piece of bioengineering. You're the most sophisticated, responsive system I've ever had the privilege to encounter." He ran a hand along the wall, which felt warm and resilient, like solid muscle. "Honestly," he murmured, his voice softening as he admired the seamless weave of nerve fibers and hull plating, "I've never seen anything like you. You're holding us together when we should be falling apart. I would dedicate my entire career to understanding how you work." The ship went completely still. The sick green light vanished, replaced by a deep, sultry crimson. The temperature in the room climbed by 5 degrees. The door to the hallway hissed shut with a very final-sounding thud, and the lights overhead dimmed to a soft, romantic twilight. Eli froze, his hand still resting on the wall. What just happened?" he whispered. Caleb let out a sudden, sharp bark of laughter. She sat up, a wicked grin on her face in the dim light. "I think you just proposed," she said, "and I think the ship just accepted." Eli snatched his hand back as if the wall had burned him. "I was complimenting its architecture." "You told a sentient, empathetic organism that you wanted to commit to it forever," Caleb teased, getting to her feet and stretching. Her armor creaked, the sound echoing in the new, intimate silence. "And now she's setting the mood. She's playing chaperone." The ship pulsed, a slow, rhythmic throb that sounded exactly like a heartbeat, a very slow, suggestive heartbeat. "This is insane," Eli muttered, his face turning red. "I'm in a love triangle with our spaceship." "Better the ship than the void," Caleb said, stepping up beside him. She put a hand on his shoulder. Her touch felt heavy, grounding. The ship sensed the connection, and the crimson light softened back to a contented gold. The door slid open again. "See?" Caleb murmured. "She stabilizes when we're on the same page. She needs us to be compatible." Eli looked at Caleb in the soft glow. The harsh lines of her face were softened. The glowing scars on her neck looked less like angry warnings and more like gentle constellations. "Compatible," Eli repeated, the word feeling strange and heavy in his mouth. Before the moment could turn into something more complicated, the view screen, a transparent membrane at the front of the ship, shifted. The stars were gone. They were deep inside the forbidden corridor now. The space outside was a swirling bruise of violet and black gas, moving in impossible currents. There were no points of light, just hazy clouds that looked disturbingly like watching eyes. The ship slowed, and the hum of its engine changed from a purr to a low, mournful keen. "What is that?" Eli asked, glancing at the readings on his handheld scanner. "The sensors are going crazy. I'm getting readings of temporal displacement." "Time lags," Caleb said, her hand instinctively falling to the handle of her blade. "The stories say this corridor doesn't just hide ships, it remembers them." As they drifted deeper, it began. It started with echoes, ghostly images of other vessels flickering in the gas clouds, ancient warships from conflicts 1,000 years ago, sleek courier ships that had vanished without a trace. They would appear for a moment, looking solid and real, before dissolving back into mist. Then came the sound. It didn't come through their ears, but vibrated directly in their skulls. A chorus of whispers, woven into the nebula's static. "Eli." Eli stopped cold, the blood freezing in his veins. "Mom?" he whispered. The voice was unmistakably that of the woman who had died when he was 12, the woman who always smelled of soldering fumes and cheap tea. "You were always the smart one, Eli," the voice whispered from every corner of the room. "You survived. You always survive, even when everyone else burns." "No," Eli gasped, clamping his hands over his ears. "That's not real." "You left us," the voice accused, its tone shifting from pride to a deep, cutting sorrow. "You hid in your books and your numbers while the sickness took us all. You're so good at hiding, my little genius. "Get out of my head!" Eli shouted, squeezing his eyes shut. Caleb wasn't even looking at him. She was staring, rigid as a statue, into the swirling view screen. "Hail the shield of the crown," a chorus of voices chanted. It was the royal anthem, but twisted and distorted, as if sung by 1,000 dead soldiers. "Our beautiful monster," the voices crooned directly to her. "Our beautiful, broken thing. We made you sharp so you could cut the world for us. Don't you miss the blood, Caleb? Don't you miss the applause?" "It's a lie," Caleb growled, her hands balling into tight fists. "Is it?" the voices whispered back. "You felt powerful when you broke them. You felt right." The ship began to shake, not the gentle purr from before, but a violent, terrified rattling. "The psychic attack is bleeding into the ship's nervous system," Eli realized, forcing himself to think through the crushing grief. "It's a psychological feedback loop. It feeds on regret and longing." He reached out and grabbed Caleb's arm. She flinched away, almost striking him, her eyes wide and feral. "Caleb, it's the nebula. None of it is real." She looked at him, and for a split second he saw the terrified kid she must have been, buried under a lifetime of armor. Then she blinked, and the warrior was back. "I know," she gritted out. "Focus on me," Eli commanded. "Not the voices. Me, I'm here. I'm real. I'm annoying, and I accidentally proposed to our spaceship. But I am real." They called her a monster, a traitor, a weapon that had turned on its masters. But Caleb knew the truth. She was the scapegoat in a war she was never meant to survive. Now, she was on the run with the one person who believed her, a brilliant but terrified analyst named Eli. He claimed the proof of her innocence, the key to unraveling the entire conspiracy, was hidden in a dead ghost station floating in the middle of nowhere. If he's wrong, they die. If he's right, they might just start a revolution. What would you do if the only way to clear your name was to trust the last person you ever should? They steered their ship, the Resonance, through a thick purple fog, and a massive silent ring of dark metal and silver appeared before them. It was an ancient, dead relay. "That's it," Eli said, his eyes glued to the scanner. "The archive is inside." As their ship docked with a groan of stressed metal, Caleb felt a strange whisper of warning, as if the Resonance itself was begging them to be careful before the airlock hissed open. The station was a tomb. The air tasted stale, like it had been recycled for millennia by dying machines. "This way to the central core," Eli whispered, his flashlight beam slicing through the oppressive darkness. They walked down a long hallway lined with what looked like mirrors, but as they got closer, Caleb realized they were something else entirely. They were psychoreactive, showing not just their reflections, but their deepest, darkest fears. Eli glanced to his left and froze. He saw himself as a small, helpless boy in a burning room, clutching a data pad. He was running calculations on his own survival while the air filled with screams. In the mirror, he didn't hesitate. He stepped right over the body of a friend to reach the only exit. The body was Caleb's. "Coward," his own reflection sneered. "You see people as numbers," the reflection hissed. "You cut your losses. When the math on her gets too complicated, you'll leave her to die too." Eli tore his gaze away, a wave of nausea washing over him. Caleb looked to her right and saw herself standing on a mountain of bodies, glowing with a terrifying, beautiful light. A crowd below was chanting her name, their faces a mixture of adoration and pure fear. She was smiling, soaking it all in. "You love it," her reflection whispered seductively. "You pretend you're just a tool, but you crave being the hand that holds the knife. Without a war to fight, you're nothing but a broken girl in a fancy metal suit." Caleb stopped dead in her tracks, staring at the horrible, smiling version of herself. "Stop it," she breathed. Eli saw her stop, saw the twisted image she was staring at. "Caleb, we have to keep moving," he urged, his voice strained. "It's just trying to get in our heads, to split us up." "Is it?" Caleb shot back, turning to him. Her eyes were like chips of ice, reflecting the monster in the mirror. Or is it just showing you exactly who you're traveling with? She waved a hand at the image. Take a good look, Eli. That's me. That's what they made me to be. That's what they did to you, Eli insisted. It's not who you are. How would you know? Caleb snapped, her voice echoing in the dead silence. Maybe I liked it. Maybe I enjoyed having that much power. She took a menacing step toward him. And what about you? She challenged, pointing a trembling finger at his own reflection. Look at yourself, the great survivor, the one who's always willing to pay the price, as long as it's with someone else's life. You're scared of me, Eli. You have been since the day we met. I'm not, he lied. You are, she screamed, her voice cracking. And you should be, because I'm a killer, and you're a coward who hides behind big ideas until things get tough. Then you run. The words hit Eli harder than any punch. I run because I want to live, he yelled back, his cool demeanor completely shattered. Not everyone is built to be an unstoppable tank, Caleb. Some of us are just soft. Some of us break. Then break somewhere else, Caleb roared. She shoved past him so hard he stumbled, and she stormed off alone into the darkness. Caleb! Eli shouted after her, but she was gone. He was left alone in the hall, his harsh breathing the only sound. Just then, the emergency lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute blackness. At the same moment, the resonance screamed, a psychic shockwave that vibrated through the station's very bones. Without both of them in harmony, the ship was tearing itself apart. System failure, a robotic voice announced from hidden speakers. Life support critical. Eli stared into the suffocating dark. He could run. Go back to the ship. Leave her behind. The mirror was right. He was good at surviving. But then he looked down the hall where she had gone, walking right into a trap, totally alone, and believing she was a monster. He closed his eyes. I am not a coward, he whispered to the silence. And then he started to run, not back toward safety, but after her. He found her in the main data core, standing before a huge console. Her shoulders were shaking, her hands gripping the terminal so tight the metal was groaning in protest. Caleb, Eli panted, sliding to a stop beside her. Go away, she whispered, her voice thick. The ship is dying. Save yourself. No, Eli said, walking steadily toward her. He didn't run this time. He took slow, deliberate steps until he was right behind her. Caleb finally turned, and he saw that her face was streaked with silent tears, cutting paths through the grime on her cheeks. Why didn't you run? She asked, her voice breaking. Don't you see what I am? I see you, Eli said softly. He reached out and gently took her hands. They were ice cold and trembling. I'm terrified, he admitted, and she tried to pull away. I know. No, listen to me, he said, holding her hands firmly. I'm not terrified of you. I'm terrified of wanting you. Caleb froze. What? All my life, I've just tried to be useful, he explained, his voice raw with honesty. The guy who fixes things so he doesn't get thrown away. I take what I can get, but wanting you, really letting myself want you, that feels selfish. And I'm scared I'll break you, because I don't know how to hold on to something precious without destroying it. He finally met her gaze, his eyes wide and vulnerable. I'm not running, Caleb. I'm staying, even if it scares the hell out of me. Caleb stared at him, then down at his hands holding hers. It's not selfish, she said softly, as if discovering the truth for herself. Not if it's a choice, not if you just ask. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. Ask me, she whispered. Stay with me, Eli breathed. I'm here, she answered. In that moment, they synchronized. It wasn't a desperate act for survival this time. It was a choice. He matched his breathing to hers, and she slowed her cybernetically enhanced heart to beat in time with his. The shaking of the station stopped. The psychic scream from the resonance faded into a peaceful hum. The lights flickered back on, not angry red, but a clean, steady white. A bell chimed from the console behind them. A voice announced, "Biometric lock disengaged. Access granted." They pulled apart slowly, the air crackling with something new and hopeful. "Let's see the truth," Caleb said, her voice steady. Eli turned to the console, and a galaxy of information exploded into the room. Holographic files, audio logs, and secret maps. It was all there. The so-called Council of Balance wasn't just a rogue group. It was a conspiracy at the highest levels. The Human Council and the Veyron royal family had worked together to create the entire crisis. "Look," Eli said, pointing to a file named Unity Protocol. "They planned to disrupt the galactic peace engine to cause a temporary panic. Then their own balance authority would swoop in, fix the problem, and seize permanent control of all trade routes and energy sources. And here's the bad guy they created," Caleb said, her finger tracing the name of her former commander, Vrax. "He was the designated villain. He was supposed to get caught and publicly executed to give everyone a sense of justice, while the real criminals kept all the power he stole for them. And the scapegoat," Eli added, his own name glowing on the screen. "Eli Ward, expendable asset." Caleb scrolled down, and then she gasped. "No. What is it?" Eli asked. She pointed at the list of architects who designed the plan. There, in glowing blue letters, was the name Prince Vorian, Caleb's brother. "He signed the order," Caleb whispered, her voice hollow. "My own blood. He helped put this chain around my neck." "He knew you would be the one sent to hunt me," Eli realized. "He used your loyalty to him against you both." One last file remained, marked Omega Contingency. Eli opened it. "The peace engine," he read aloud. "It has a kill switch. If the Authority can't maintain control, they can trigger it to create a permanent stasis field across the galaxy." "It wouldn't just stop travel," Caleb finished, her eyes wide with horror. "It would isolate every system. No ships, no communication. Every world would become a prison. They would rather freeze the entire galaxy solid than lose their power." "We have to broadcast this. Now," Eli said, his hands flying across the console. "Breach detected," the station's AI blared. "Phase incursion in Sector 4. "They're here," Caleb said, whipping her head around. "Who?" "A Council strike team," she answered, drawing her weapons. The solid metal wall behind them began to shimmer, and a figure in sleek, blurry white armor simply stepped right through it. "Phase tech," Caleb grunted, shoving Eli behind the console just as the soldier fired. The energy blast passed silently through the metal console and exploded against the back wall. "They can shoot through cover," Eli yelled. "Stay down," Caleb ordered, launching herself forward. She swung her glaive, but the blade passed through the soldier's chest as if he were a ghost. He solidified an instant later, swinging his rifle like a club at her head. Caleb ducked just in time. "I can't hit him," she shouted. "He keeps shifting between dimensions." Eli peeked over the console, his mind racing, analyzing the soldier's every flicker and shift. There had to be a pattern. There was always a pattern. He saw the armor shimmer, and in that flicker, he saw the pattern, a perfect sine wave. "They have to become solid to shoot," Eli yelled, a sudden fire in his eyes. "And there's a 4-second delay while their weapons recharge." He scrambled to his feet, his mind racing, locking onto the shifting light of the soldier's suit. "Kaith, you have to listen to me." In that moment, he wasn't a disgraced archivist. He was a navigator again, charting a course not through stars, but through combat. "Phase in at 3 o'clock in 2, 1. Mark." Kaith didn't hesitate. She swung her massive glaive into what looked like empty air. A soldier materialized exactly where Eli predicted, stepping directly into the blade's path. The impact sent him flying, his high-tech armor sparking violently. Just then, 2 more soldiers phased through the ceiling. "0G!" Eli shouted, slamming his hand on the station's big red gravity override button. The universe turned upside down as gravity vanished in an instant. Keith kicked off a wall, transforming into a spinning blur of death. "Above you!" Eli called out, tracking their movements. "Vector Zeus 10!" Keith adjusted in midair, firing her boot thrusters just enough to change her trajectory. She sliced downward, her blade shearing through one soldier's phase pack. He solidified immediately, floating helpless and stunned in the zero-gravity environment. But the team leader was already materializing by the main console, raising his rifle to aim directly at Eli. Keith saw him. Pushing off a floating chunk of debris, she launched herself across the room like a torpedo. She tackled the leader, slamming him hard against the wall. She had him pinned, the razor-sharp edge of her glaive kissing his throat. The fight was over. The adrenaline sang in her veins, and a familiar voice whispered in her mind. The old Keith, the weapon, would have taken his head without a second thought. The leader's eyes were wide with fear behind his visor. "Go on! Do it, monster!" he spat, trying to sound brave. Keith's muscles tensed. She remembered the voices from her past, asking, "Do you miss the blood?" She glanced over at Eli. He was floating by the console, watching her, not with fear, but with complete and total trust. In his eyes, she wasn't a monster. Slowly, Keith pulled her blade back. "No," she said, her voice steady. She reversed the weapon and slammed the heavy pommel into the soldier's helmet, cracking his faceplate and knocking him out cold. "I am not a monster," she whispered to the unconscious man. "And I'm not a tool." She turned back to Eli. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softening. Eli floated over, taking her hand to keep them both from drifting away. "I'm okay," he said, his voice full of awe. "That was incredible." "It was adequate," she replied, though a small smile touched her lips. "Your directions were acceptable." They looked at the 3 unconscious soldiers floating uselessly in the room. "They know we have the data now," Eli said grimly. "They won't send a small team next time. They'll send a fleet." "We can't run anymore," Keith agreed, her gaze fixed on the archive drive in Eli's hand. "If we broadcast this from out here, the nebula will just scramble the signal." A heavy realization settled in Eli's stomach. "We have to go back," he said. "To the summit station. To Vera." Keith nodded, her face set like stone. "It's the only transmitter powerful enough to cut through the interference and reach every network in the sector." "But if we do that," Eli said, the full weight of their decision hitting him, "we're walking right back into the lion's mouth." "And if we succeed," Keith countered, "if we show everyone the conspiracy, it could cause panic, riots, maybe even war." "Or," Eli said, thinking of the kill switch file on the drive, "we save everyone from a cage they don't even know is being built." Keith squeezed his hand, her resolve firm. "We choose truth," she said. "On our terms." She pulled him toward the airlock. "Let's go start a fire." The summit station was no longer a place of celebration. It was a fortress holding its breath. The same glittering halls where champagne had flowed just 2 days ago were now patrolled by heavily armed infantry. The very air felt thick with fear, and the low, humming thrum of a security grid pushed to its absolute maximum. Huge banners hung from the ceilings, displaying the brand-new logo of the so-called Balance Authority, a sword cutting through a shield. Simple and deeply threatening. Eli adjusted the collar of his disguise, a holographic suit meant to make him look like a boring, mid-level Veyron dignitary. It wasn't working. "It's tightening again," Eli hissed, pulling at the invisible fabric around his neck. "Why does it keep tightening? It feels like a python with a personal grudge." Keith walked beside him, disguised as a diplomatic aide in heavy, flowing robes, her face hidden by a deep hood. She was forcing herself to walk with a slow, shuffling gait that looked completely ridiculous on her powerful warrior's frame. "It's tightening because your heart rate is 130 beats per minute," she whispered, keeping her head bowed as they passed through a security checkpoint. "The suit uses biofeedback. When you get stressed, it constricts as a reminder to calm down." "That is a terrible design feature," Eli whispered back furiously. "Cutting off my air supply does not make me calm. It makes me lightheaded." They turned a corner into an empty service corridor, finally away from prying eyes. Keith gently pushed him against the wall. "Allow me," she said, a little smirk playing on her lips. She reached out, her hands resting on the chest of his holographic suit, but she didn't fix it right away. She let her fingers linger, slowly smoothing the virtual fabric with a gentleness that was completely unnecessary. "You are enjoying this," Eli accused, feeling his face flush. "We're about to break into the most secure server in the galaxy, and you're teasing me." Keith leaned in closer, her eyes glittering in the shadow of her hood. "If we're about to die, I'd rather you die blushing than pale," she whispered. She lightly tapped the emitter on his collarbone, and the suit instantly relaxed. Eli took a huge, greedy breath of air. "Better?" she asked. He looked at her, at the way the dangerous warrior in her eyes softened just a little when she looked at him. "Much," he breathed. They split up at the next junction. The plan was simple, which probably meant it was doomed to fail. Eli would head down to the server farm to physically jack into the system. Keith, meanwhile, would go up to the royal spire to steal the biometric keys from her own brother's private quarters. They needed both components to override the lockdown on the so-called peace engine. "Be invisible," Keith said softly. "Be careful," Eli replied. He watched her melt into the shadows, then turned and ran for the server farm. The server farm was like a frozen forest, filled with towers of humming machines and blinking lights. Eli got to work, his fingers flying across the terminal. He slipped past the firewalls using back doors he himself had designed years ago, back when he naively thought he was building a shield, not a cage. He pulled the system logs from the last 48 hours. The data flooded his screen. He was expecting to find military orders, maybe some political manifesto. Instead, he found money. Trillions of credits being moved through shell corporations. It's not just a coup, Eli realized, his blood running cold as he stared at the numbers. It's a buyout. The data laid it all bare. A third player, a shadowy coalition of megacorporations called the Root Lords, had secretly funded the entire operation. The Balance Authority wasn't created to enforce peace. It was created to privatize it. They were about to create a total monopoly on all interstellar travel, backed by the unstoppable power of the peace engine. "Well done, Eli." The voice echoed from the terminal's speakers. Eli froze. A shimmering hologram flickered to life behind him. It was his old boss, Supervisor Vance, looking tired and disheveled, holding a glass of amber liquid. "I knew you'd check the logs," Vance said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You were always so thorough. It's why I hired you." "You sold us all out," Eli said, turning to face the ghost of his former mentor. "You helped them break the engine. People died, Vance." "People always die," Vance said with a shrug. "This is just business, Eli. The old treaty was failing. The so-called peace was fragile. The authority brings order, and profit requires order." He took a slow sip of his drink. "I can get you out of this, Eli. I've cleared a shuttle for you in Bay 4. New name, plenty of credits. You can disappear. Go live a long, quiet life in the outer colonies." Eli stared at the hologram, feeling that old instinct to just run, to survive, to escape the problem. "What's the price?" Eli asked, already knowing the answer. "Give me the Veyron," Vance said flatly. "She's a loose end. The new government needs her gone to make the transition smooth. Give us Keith, and you walk away a free man." Eli laughed, a harsh, broken sound that echoed in the cold room. You think I'm a loose end too, don't you? I think you're a survivor, Vance corrected him. Do the math, Eli. 1 life, in exchange for a lifetime of your own. I did the math, Eli said, stepping toward the hologram, a new fire in his eyes. And I realized something. You can't solve for trust when you keep dividing everything by fear. He typed one last command into the console. Delete. The logs Vance had been using to track him vanished into nothing. I'm not a variable you can control anymore, Eli said. And I am not alone. He cut the connection, and the hologram dissolved. Eli grabbed his datapad and ran. He had just burned his last bridge. There was no going back now. High above in the royal spire, Kaith was walking through a living nightmare. She moved silently through the golden corridors she had grown up in, but everything felt twisted and wrong. Guards who had known her since she was a child whispered her name like a curse as she passed, never realizing it was her under the robes. The traitor, they muttered. The mad dog. The human lover. She finally reached the private chambers of her brother, Prince Vorian. She slipped inside and locked the door. He was already there, waiting. He stood by the massive window, looking out at the warships gathering in the blackness of space. He didn't turn around. I felt you arrive, sister, Vorian said, his voice calm. You always did have a heavy footstep. Kaith threw back her hood, her face a mask of anger and pain. Why, Vorian, why would you do this? Her brother finally turned. He didn't look evil or guilty. He just looked sad. Because the galaxy is tired, Kaith, he said softly. Look at them. Humans, Vayrans, all of us. We fight over table scraps. We demand freedom, but we don't know what to do with it. All we create is chaos, and chaos always leads to war. So you built them a cage? Kaith demanded, her voice rising. You broke the very peace engine our father built just to frighten everyone into obeying you? I built a shelter, Vorian snapped back, his sadness finally cracking to reveal the anger beneath. The Balance Authority promises to halt all the fighting. We will secure the borders, they say. We will bring peace. But it's not peace, it's control. And control is a whole lot worse than extinction, especially when you're the weapon they're pointing at everyone else. My brother, Vorian, just sighed. You always take everything so personally, Kaith. We made you to be a tool. We built you to be strong, to be feared. Why fight your own nature? I looked him dead in the eye. Because I found something more powerful than fear. I didn't move to attack him. I lunged right past him, snatching the biometric signet ring he was supposed to protect. He didn't even try to stop me. He just watched me with this look of pity. You can steal the key, sister, he said, his voice barely a whisper. But you can't unlock their world. The people want to be ruled. I glanced back at him one last time. Then I guess they'll have to learn how to be brave. With that, I smashed the window with the hilt of my sword and jumped, my gravity chute kicking in as I dove toward the city below. Down in the guts of the station, in a cramped, hot maintenance hub that reeked of grease, I found Eli. He was shaking, and a drone had grazed my cheek during the fall, leaving a stinging cut. We have the codes, Eli gasped, plugging his datapad into the ring I'd stolen. We have the proof, but we only have 20 minutes before their vote passes, I said, checking my weapon. I looked over at him, really looked at him. I could see the terror making his hands tremble, but his jaw was set like stone. He hadn't run. Eli, I said softly. I set my rifle on the ground, reached up, and unclasped my helmet. It hit the floor with a thud. Then I started on the seals of my chest plate. What are you doing? He asked, his voice catching. We're about to expose everything, I told him. I'm done hiding. The heavy armor on my left shoulder clanged on the floor, followed by the right, and then the breastplate. I stripped off every single piece of armor until I was standing there in just my thin thermal undersuit, a black mesh that left nothing to the imagination. Now he could see them all. The glowing bioluminescent scars weren't just on my neck. They twisted down my arms, crisscrossed my ribs, and spiraled around my spine like a glowing map of every single modification, every brutal surgery, every single battle they had forced me through. And you could see the ports, the little silver input jacks at the base of my skull and along my spine where they pumped the combat drugs into me. But I didn't look like a monster. I looked like a survivor. "Don't look away," I whispered. "I couldn't if I wanted to," Eli breathed. He stepped closer, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body. I took his hand and gently placed it over the silver port on my neck. "This is where they connect me to the tactical grid," I told him. "It makes me cold. It makes me stop feeling." I looked right into his eyes. "Make me feel something, Eli." His heart was pounding so hard I thought I could see it through his shirt. This wasn't just about me being undressed. I was dismantling myself for him, handing him the blueprints to all my pain. "May I?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes," I breathed out. He leaned in, but he didn't kiss my lips. He kissed the cold, silver port on my neck. Then he kissed the long scar that ran down my shoulder. He kissed the jagged, faded line over my ribs. A sound escaped my lips that was half a sob and half a sigh of relief. My hands got tangled in his hair, and I pulled him closer. Everywhere his lips touched my skin, the scars flared, their cold violet light turning into a warm, burning gold. "You are not a tool," Eli murmured against my skin. "You are not a weapon. You are Kaith." I pressed my forehead against his. "And you are not a coward," I whispered back. "You are the bravest man I have ever known." We just held each other there in the dark, skin against skin, breath against breath. It was frantic and shaky and desperate, the kind of intimacy you find when you know the world is about to end, and the only thing that matters is this one defiant connection. We were just two people choosing each other in a world that was determined to own us. "We have to go," Eli finally whispered, without letting go. "I know," I said. I pulled away, my eyes shining. I didn't put the armor back on. I just pulled a simple flight jacket over my undersuit. "No more armor?" Eli asked. I picked up my rifle. "No," I said. "If they want the truth, they're going to get all of it." The control room was guarded by two bored technicians who never stood a chance. I took them down with two swift, non-lethal strikes. Eli jumped onto the main console, his fingers flying across the keypad. "I'm patching our proof into the station's main broadcast tower," he said. "Our ship will boost the signal. We're going to override every single screen in the whole sector. Uploading in 3 minutes," he announced. "We just have to hold the door," I said, taking position. But the attack didn't come from the door. The entire wall blew inward. A concussion grenade went off, and the world turned blindingly white. A deafening ringing slammed into Eli's head, throwing him backward against the console. When his vision finally cleared, he was on his knees with a heavy boot pinning his back to the floor. Across the room, I was surrounded by a dozen royal guards. My rifle was gone. I was crouched, ready to fight, but 5 red laser sights were all aimed directly at my head. "Hold!" a voice boomed. Commander Vrak stepped through the smoke, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at a camera drone hovering right above us, its little red light blinking. It was broadcasting live. "Citizens of the Alliance," Vrak said to the camera, his voice full of fake gravity. "We have just stopped a terrorist plot." Behind him, a giant screen flickered to life. It showed footage of Eli and me, but it was all wrong. They had twisted it, splicing the audio and changing the angles. On the screen, a monster version of me was shoving Eli, holding a blade to his throat. Do it, human, the fake me growled. Sabotage the engine, or I'll gut you. Eli watched in pure horror. They were rewriting our story right in front of our eyes. They were turning him into a victim, and me into a monster. This man, Vrax continued, gesturing down at Eli, was coerced. An innocent analyst, kidnapped and forced to serve a rogue biological weapon. Vrax finally looked at me. Surrender, Unit 7 Alpha. Release your hostage, and we will show him mercy. Eli struggled under the boot. No, it's a lie. She saved me. Vrax kicked him hard, knocking the wind out of him. I slowly stood up. I looked at the twisted lies on the screen, then at Eli bleeding on the floor, and I understood the trap. If I fought, they'd kill Eli and call me a murderer. If I surrendered, they'd execute me and use Eli as their puppet to legitimize their rule. They were using my love for him as a weapon to destroy us both. I looked right at Vrax, my face terrifyingly calm. You want me to surrender? I asked, raising my hands. I surrender. A smug smile spread across Vrax's face. Smart weapon, he sneered. But I wasn't finished. However, I said, my voice ringing out clear enough for the drone's microphone to pick it up, as a member of the Royal Guard, I invoke the right of veracity. The entire room went dead silent. Even the guards flinched, lowering their weapons just a little. The right of veracity was an ancient law, older than any treaty. It gave a condemned warrior the right to challenge their accuser to single combat. If they won, their testimony had to be heard. Vrax's smile vanished. That law is archaic. The Council may not recognize it, but the Veyron people do, I said, staring straight into the camera. So what is it, Commander? Are you a coward, or will you face the weapon you helped build? I was betting everything on his pride. I knew he couldn't back down from a direct challenge on a live broadcast without losing the respect of his entire fleet. Vrax snarled and unclipped his heavy plasma mace. Clear the room, he roared. I'll put this dog down myself. The guards backed up, forming a circle. As one guard pinned Eli, I caught his eye and gave a microscopic twitch of my finger, signaling toward the console. Vrax lunged, completely lost in his own rage. The fight was brutal. Vrax was a mountain in heavy armor, and his mace crackled with enough energy to shatter bone. I was unarmored, with just my speed and a flight jacket. I dodged a swing that pulverized the floor where I'd been standing and rolled, coming up with a discarded metal pipe. I was a blur, but Vrax was a tank. He managed to clip my shoulder with the mace, sending me spinning into a wall. I spat out a mouthful of violet blood. This is what happens when tools think they're people, he bellowed, bringing the mace down for the final blow. But just as I slid out of the way, Eli made his move. He bit the ankle of the guard, holding him down. The guard yelped, his grip loosening for just a second. That was all Eli needed. He surged forward, not towards the fight, but straight for the console. He slammed his hand down on the interface. Resonance! He screamed into the comms. Override! The living ship waiting for us outside the station heard his desperate call. It didn't respond with code. It responded with pure emotion. A raw, psychic scream of protection flooded the station's entire network. The screens in the room flickered, and the fake video of me threatening Eli glitched and died. In the chaos, I saw my opening. I dropped the pipe, stepped inside Vrax's guard, and grabbed both of his wrists. I didn't hit him. I synchronized with him, forcing my breathing and my heart rate to match his. For one single moment, the weapon and its maker were one. And through that link, I pushed everything, every memory, every ounce of pain, every bit of love I felt for Eli. The truth flooded the live broadcast, not as a story, but as a feeling shared by millions. Vrax screamed as he felt a lifetime of my suffering in a single second, and then he collapsed, his mind shattered on live TV. The regime fell that day. Eli and I escaped, not as a weapon and her hostage, but as two people who learned that true strength isn't found in armor or in fear. It's found when you have the courage to show someone your scars, and they have the courage to kiss them. You have to look closer, she yelled. and then she drove her forehead straight into his faceplate. The reinforced visor didn't stand a chance. It exploded into a spiderweb of cracks. Commander Vra stumbled backward, completely stunned, with sharp fragments blinding his eyes. In that single moment of weakness, Keith kicked his legs out from under him. He hit the deck with a metallic clang that echoed through the entire room. She stood over him, chest heaving, with a trickle of blood running from her hairline down her cheek. But she didn't finish him. Instead, she grabbed the hovering camera drone, yanking it down to her eye level. "My name is Keith," she announced to anyone and everyone watching across the galaxy. "And I am not the monster." At the same time, Eli slammed the final key on his console. The upload was complete. Every single screen on the station, every datapad in the fleet, every giant billboard in the capital city suddenly flickered and changed. The secret files appeared for all to see. The hidden audio logs from the General, the secret payment records from the System Lords, and the official order to activate the kill switch. The truth came rushing out all at once, like a tidal wave. On the floor, Vra just groaned. "You fool!" Suddenly, the station's alarms shifted into a terrifying new key. A high-pitched siren started to shriek, a sound so piercing it made your teeth hurt. "Omega Protocol initiated," the calm, robotic voice of the station's AI announced. "Peace engine kill switch activated." Eli stared at the main screen in horror. Through the massive viewport, he could see the peace engine, a giant silver sphere, suddenly turn into a deep, light-swallowing black. A ripple of pure distortion began to pulse outward from it. "The Council," Eli whispered. "They saw the broadcast. If they can't have the galaxy, they're going to put it on ice." The ripple reached the closest patrol ship. In an instant, the vessel just stopped. All its lights went out. It just hung there in the void, perfectly frozen in an unbreakable stasis field. "That wave is getting bigger," Keith said, pulling Eli to his feet. "We have to get to the engine now." They took off running, leaving the knocked-out commander and the fallout from the truth bomb behind them. They were in a race against a spreading silence that was threatening to snuff out the stars one by one. The universe wasn't going to end with a massive explosion. It was going to end with a quiet, final stop. The whole station groaned around them, pushed to its limits by forces it was never built to handle. The peace engine, now a sphere of pure blackness in the middle of the main hall, was pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to break the laws of physics. With every single pulse, the station itself seemed to flicker in and out of existence. Through the reinforced window of the control deck, Eli Ward saw a council frigate try to fire its emergency thrusters. A blue flame shot out from the engine, and then it just froze solid, becoming a permanent cone of fire, like a fly trapped in amber. The ship was completely motionless. It was just hanging there, caught in a bubble of absolutely terrifying stillness. "It's spreading!" Eli yelled over the shriek of twisting metal. "The stasis field is growing exponentially. It's already shut down the local trade lane. If that thing hits the hyper relay, it'll freeze the entire sector." Keith stood next to him, her flight jacket torn and her face smudged with grease and her own blood. She was watching a security monitor. "Council guards are cutting through the blast doors," she said, her voice amazingly calm in all the chaos. "They would rather see the whole galaxy freeze than let us shut that thing down." Eli's fingers were a blur across the console, desperately searching for any frequency the engine might listen to. "They think they can control it," he said. "They figure once everything is frozen solid, they'll be the only ones with the key to unfreeze it. But they have no idea what they've done. The engine is out of control. It's not just going to stop spaceships. It's going to stop biology. It will literally freeze hearts in the middle of a beat." He slammed his fist down on the console in frustration. "I can't override it from out here. The code is rewriting itself. It's locked out all external commands." "So how do we stop it?" Keith asked. "We have to go inside," Eli said, turning to face her. "Inside the chamber? That's suicide. The gravitational forces alone will crush us into pulp." "Not inside the chamber," Eli corrected her. Inside the software, using the neural interface, the engine was built to be stabilized by two different biological inputs, one Veyron and one human. It's searching for a connection to calm the chaos. He glanced at the pulsing black orb in the distance. "We have to link our minds directly to the core," Eli said. "We have to convince it to stop." Keith looked over at the heavy blast doors, which were now glowing cherry red where plasma cutters were burning through from the other side. "Well, then we'd better get to the core room," she said, "and it looks like we've got an army standing in our way." Just then, the blast doors blew inward with a deafening boom. Thick smoke poured into the room. Through the haze, they could see the dark shapes of armored troopers moving forward, weapons raised. "Surrender!" a voice commanded. Keith had other plans. She ripped a heavy fire suppression canister off the wall and threw it with all her might toward the breach. Then she fired a single shot from her pulse rifle, hitting the canister in midair. It exploded, instantly filling the hallway with a thick cloud of chemical foam, blinding the entire lead squad. "Go!" she yelled, grabbing Eli's arm. They bolted through a side exit, diving into a maze of service tunnels. The entire station was pitching and rolling as the artificial gravity sputtered and failed. One second they were running on the floor, and the next they were scrambling along a wall. They burst out into the main atrium, trying to get across to the engine core on the other side. But it was a death trap. Dozens of elite council soldiers were waiting for them, dug in behind makeshift barricades. They immediately opened fire. Keith shoved Eli behind a large marble fountain that was now shooting water completely sideways. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, chipping away at the marble cover. "We're pinned down!" Keith yelled over the noise. "I'm shooting back, but there's no way I can clear a path through that many of them." Eli frantically looked around, his mind racing, calculating angles and probabilities. The odds were 0.0. "We need a miracle," Eli muttered. Or, a new voice, full of static, crackled over the station's PA system, cutting through the wailing sirens. "What you need is a very, very expensive distraction." Right on cue, the ceiling of the atrium shattered. A beat-up patchwork shuttle, painted with garish neon colors and clearly welded together from scrap, smashed through the glass dome above. It didn't bother with a gentle landing. It crashed like a meteor, flattening a council barricade and skidding across the polished floor in a massive shower of sparks. The hatch hissed and blew open. Jax, the four-armed information broker, was sitting in the pilot's seat, laughing like a maniac. "Sorry, no refunds available!" Jax shrieked through the ship's external speakers, and then, pouring out of the shuttle's cargo bay, came the most random group of misfits Eli had ever laid eyes on. Smugglers, hired guns, and outcasts from Latchpoint Station. At their head was the huge, lizard-like mercenary Eli had literally bumped into at the bazaar. "For the Guild!" the reptile roared, firing a grenade launcher straight into the council's ranks. It was pure, beautiful, glorious chaos. The crew from Latchpoint didn't fight with any kind of military discipline. They fought with dirty tricks and unpredictable genius. Smoke bombs, flashbangs, and shimmering holographic decoys filled the massive room. "Go, go, go!" Jax yelled, waving two of his forearms at Keith. "I'm sending you the bill for the shuttle!" Keith shot back with a fierce, wild grin on her face. "You got it!" she shouted. She grabbed Eli and pulled him to his feet. With the council troops completely overwhelmed by the bizarre assault, the path to the engine core was finally clear. They ran, ducking under stray blaster fire and leaping over chunks of debris as the gravity flickered again. They finally made it to the massive, circular airlock of the engine core. Keith slammed her hand on the manual override panel. The gears screamed in protest before the heavy door slowly rolled aside. They stepped through. The noise of the battle vanished instantly. The room was completely dominated by the peace engine. It wasn't the sleek, silver machine they had seen before. It was a contained hurricane. The black sphere at its center was now surrounded by spinning rings of pure light that seemed to scream with raw energy. The air pressure was so intense it felt like it was trying to crush their eardrums. At the base of the machine sat two interface chairs, connected by thick bundles of cables to the central processor. Eli stumbled toward the human interface chair, and Keith took the Veyron one. Warning! A flat, automated voice droned from the machine. System instability at critical levels. Synchronization required immediately. Eli hurriedly strapped himself in. He looked over at Keith. This isn't going to be like linking with the ship, Eli warned, his voice trembling slightly. The ship likes us. This thing wants to delete us. It's going to get inside our heads, and it's going to find every single reason we have to not trust each other. Keith clicked her own restraints into place. She looked right at him, her amber eyes perfectly clear and steady. Let it try, she said. Eli started the link. Neural handshake initiated, the computer voice said. And then, the entire world went white. Eli wasn't in the chair anymore. He found himself standing in a dull gray office with no windows. The walls were lined with endless rows of filing cabinets that stretched up into infinity. The air smelled like stale coffee and old paper. He looked down and saw he was wearing his old data analyst's uniform. It felt 2 sizes too big. He tried to take a step, but his feet felt like they were glued to the floor. You are useful here, a voice whispered in his mind. It was a smooth, logical, and ice-cold voice. Why fight it, Eli? You enjoy the background. You are safe in the background. Just then, a man walked right past him. It was Vance, his old boss. But Vance didn't even look at him. He walked straight through him as if Eli was nothing but a ghost. You are disposable, the voice soothed. You're just a number, a rounding error. If you stop the engine, you'll have to step into the spotlight. People will stare at you. They'll judge you. They will expect you to do great things. Eli felt that old, familiar panic rising in his throat, the comfort of being invisible, the safety of just being a tiny gear in a giant machine. Stay, the voice said. Let the galaxy freeze. In the ice, nothing ever changes. In the ice, you can never be wrong again. Eli squeezed his eyes shut. It was so tempting. Oh, it was so tempting to just give in, to never have to be brave again, to never risk getting hurt. But then he heard something. It was the sound of a heartbeat. But it wasn't his. It was a fast, double beat. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded angry. It sounded like it was fighting. Keith. Eli's eyes flew open. I'm not a ghost, he said out loud to the empty gray room. He tried to lift his foot, and it felt like pulling it out of wet concrete. I am not a variable, he shouted, his voice echoing. He took a heavy step forward. The filing cabinets around him rattled. I am the one who solves the equation. He threw his fist into the nearest wall, and the entire gray illusion shattered around him like a broken mirror. He was looking at Keith, who was standing on a pedestal in the middle of a huge arena, packed with millions of people, and they were all cheering, chanting her name. Cheers rained down on her, but she couldn't even bow. She couldn't move a muscle. Her entire body was cold, unyielding marble. She was a statue. Perfection, a voice whispered in her mind. See how they adore you? You are their ideal, their warrior, their shield. Caleb, or the thing that used to be Caleb, looked down at her hands. They were stone, gripping a stone sword. She couldn't feel the breeze on her skin or the warmth of the lights. Why would you want to be flesh again? The voice taunted. Flesh is weak. It bleeds, it hurts, it fails. Stay like this, Keith. Be the legend. Legends are never in pain. But as Caleb stared at the roaring crowd, she realized they weren't even looking at her. They were looking at the armor, the pose, the symbol. They were worshipping a shape, not a soul. It's so cold, Keith thought, the words echoing inside her stone prison. It is safe, the voice shot back. No one fears a statue. They just admire it from a distance. Caleb felt the marble creeping up her throat, threatening to silence her for good. It would be so simple to give in, to stop fighting and just become the beautiful, hollow hero they all wanted. But then, she felt a touch. Not cold stone, but a warm, trembling human hand. It pressed against the marble of her chest, right where her heart should be. Make me feel something, Eli. The memory of his touch was a hairline crack in the stone. I am not a monument, Caleb snarled, the thought a shockwave. She flexed, and the marble shell around her arm shattered. The stone sword clattered to the ground. I am not your symbol, she screamed, the sound raw and full of fury. The statue didn't just break. It exploded, sending shrapnel of marble flying into the cheering crowd. In an instant, the arena dissolved into a shimmering mist. Caleb and Eli found themselves in the center of the mindscape. It was no longer a cold, gray gallery, but a raging storm of raw data, a vortex of swirling numbers and violet lightning. Eli! Caleb yelled, reaching for him across the digital void. Keith! He called back, his own hand outstretched. But they were drifting apart. The engine, the consciousness of the machine, was actively separating them, pushing them away with crushing waves of logic and pure terror. Accept stability, the engine boomed, its voice a deafening, perfect chord. Order is peace, chaos is pain, choose the freeze. It flooded their minds with a vision, a galaxy frozen in a single, perfect moment. No war, no hunger, no death. Families were locked in a permanent embrace. Soldiers were frozen an instant before pulling the trigger. It was a perfect, silent museum of life. It's beautiful, Eli wept, the tears feeling shockingly real on his face. It's so safe. It's a lie, Keith screamed, fighting against the current to reach him. It's death, Eli. It's a graveyard with the lights left on. Eli looked from the frozen galaxy to her, and he saw the wild fire in her eyes. He saw messy, dangerous, terrifying life. You're right, Eli gasped. He turned to face the vision of the perfect, dead universe. Courage isn't being unafraid, he yelled at the machine. It's refusing to let fear make your decisions for you. He kicked against the current, pushing himself toward her. Keith lunged and caught his hand. The connection snapped into place like a key in a lock. Instantly, the digital storm calmed, swirling around them to form a protective sphere. They were floating in a silent, white space, holding on to each other for dear life. We have to retune it, Eli said, his voice echoing in their shared consciousness. We have to turn this kill switch into a megaphone. How? Keith asked. By showing it what's real, Eli replied. He looked at her, truly looked at the scars on her soul that the mindscape had laid bare. Keith put her hand on his chest, her eyes locking with his. Look closer, she whispered. That wasn't just a flirtation. It was a promise. Look at the truth, she urged the machine around them. Look at the people. Look at the real price of power. They closed their eyes and poured their very beings into the machine, not just their data, but their truth. Eli sent his anxiety, his desperate need to prove his worth, and the sheer force of his decision to finally fight back. Caleb poured in her years of pain, her brutal training, and her fierce refusal to be the monster they'd made her. Together, they poured in the messy, complicated, fragile trust they had built between them. The engine screamed, a shriek of pure digital agony. It couldn't compute the sheer complexity of their humanity. It tried to reject the input, but their signal was too strong. Harmonization complete. New directive accepted. In the real world, the massive black sphere at the heart of the station glowed a brilliant white. The pulse that washed out across the system wasn't a freeze command. It was a shout. The stasis fields shattered. Ships that had been frozen in space jerked back to life. The lights on the station flickered once, then held steady. But the pulse carried something more. From the Vera colony all the way to Earth, every screen, every comms channel, every holographic billboard lit up with the same feed. The archives were playing. This wasn't some subtle data leak. It was a digital flood. There were the audio logs of Prince Vorian meticulously planning the sabotage, the secret bank transfers from the corporate lords to the council, the video of Commander Rex ordering the execution of anyone who knew too much, the complete schematics of the kill switch. The entire galaxy watched, stunned, as the conspiracy unraveled in crystal-clear high definition. On the summit station, the fighting sputtered to a halt. Council guards lowered their weapons, staring at their data pads in horror. They looked up at their commanders, who were frantically and uselessly trying to shut down the broadcast. "Sir, that's your signature," a young lieutenant said to his captain, pointing at a document authorizing the network jammers. "That was a classified order," the captain stammered, backing away. "I was following protocol." The lieutenant raised his rifle, aiming it squarely at his captain's chest. "You were following orders to build us a cage," he spat. Chaos was about to erupt all over again. In the Great Hall, delegates were screaming accusations, pointing fingers. The Viren Royal Guard had their blades drawn on the human security detail. The tension was so thick it was about to snap and trigger a massacre. And then the main view screen changed. It now showed the engine core. Standing there, supporting a limping Eli, was Caleb. She looked straight into the camera. She looked exhausted, bruised, and more regal than any queen. "Stop," she commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but amplified by the station's systems. It carried the undeniable weight of the engine itself. "There will be no more lies," she said, "and there will be no revenge." She pointed a shaking finger at the camera, at the entire galaxy. "We have shown you the disease. Do not start killing each other over the symptoms. The people who did this want you to fight. They're counting on your panic so they can step in and seize control." She took a deep, steadying breath. "We demand a joint tribunal, human and Viren, and it will be open to the public, every trial broadcast, every piece of evidence available to everyone. We will build peace again, but this time, we're going to do it with the lights on." She looked directly at the armed guards in the room. "Stand down." One by one, weapons were lowered. The war never started. The aftermath was a long, painful, collective sigh of relief. The so-called Balance Authority was dissolved before it was ever even officially formed, its emergency vote collapsing within the hour. Arrests began immediately, carried out not by some secret police, but by the station's own security forces turning on their corrupt leaders. Eli Ward sat on a supply crate in the loading dock while a medic applied a synth patch to his bruised ribs. He watched the news feeds calling him a hero, the quiet analyst who saved the galaxy. He hated every second of it. "Mr. Ward," a group of human senators approached him, their eyes gleaming like sharks who'd just smelled blood in the water. "We'd like to discuss your future," the lead senator said with a greasy smile. "We have the perfect position for you in the new administration. Director of Intelligence. We need a face like yours. A hero." Eli slowly got to his feet and buttoned his torn jacket. "No," he said simply. The senator blinked. "Excuse me? I'm not your poster boy," Eli said, his voice hard. "And I'm not going to be the new face for the same old broken system." He picked up his data pad. "I want systemic reform. I want an independent oversight committee for the trade routes, run by the colonies, not the corporations. And I want to guarantee that no Level 0 kill switch protocol can ever be written into a system again." "That's highly ambitious," the senator said, his smile gone. "I know the encryption codes," Eli said, leaning in close. "And I know where you buried the rest of the bodies. Don't test me." He walked away, leaving the senators standing there, utterly speechless. The quiet genius was gone. In his place was someone loud. Caleb found Vorian in his private hangar bay as the prince was trying to scramble onto a sleek stealth yacht. He was all alone. His entourage had vanished the second the broadcast hit. He froze when he saw her, his eyes fixed on the glaive at her side. "Are you here to kill me, sister?" Vorian asked, his voice trembling. "To finish the job?" Caleb walked toward him, making no move to draw her weapon. "The old Caith would have," she said, her voice even. "The Caith you built would have cut you down and called it justice." She stopped just a few feet away. "But that Caith is dead." She tossed a data pad at his feet. "What's this?" Vorian asked. "A confession," Caith replied. "Yours." Vorian let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "I'll never sign that." "You don't have to," Caith said. "It's already recorded. The engine captured everything, Vorian. Your voice, your biometrics. It's all there." She took another step, towering over him. "So you have a choice. You can get on that ship and run. Spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, hunted by bounty hunters and eaten alive by your own paranoia until you die alone in some forgotten corner of the galaxy." She gestured to the station exit. "Or you can walk out that door. You can face the tribunal. You can admit to what you did. You can serve your sentence." Vorian looked from the ship back to the door. "Why?" he whispered. "Why give me a choice?" "Because justice isn't about fear," Caleb said. "It's about accountability." She turned her back on him and walked away. She didn't look back to see which path he chose, but a few moments later, she heard the distinct sound of the stealth yacht's engines powering down, followed by the slow, heavy footsteps of a man walking toward judgment. The resonance drifted through the quiet of deep space, far from the frantic noise of the capital worlds. The ship hummed a soft, contented tune, a deep purple vibration that seemed to fill the cabin with peace. Eli sat on the floor of the observation blister, just watching the stars. They looked different now, sharper, clearer, free. The door slid open, and Caith walked in. With the blood and grime gone, she felt almost like a different person. She'd pulled on simple, comfortable clothes, loose pants and a tunic. Nothing that even hinted at armor. She sat down next to him, their shoulders touching, and for a long moment the silence said everything. "We did it," Eli finally whispered. "We survived," she corrected him softly. Caith stared at her hands, at the faint, pulsing lines of her scars. "I always thought surviving meant being tougher than whatever was trying to kill you," she admitted, her voice low. "I figured if I turned myself into a weapon, nothing could ever touch me." She finally looked at Eli. "I looked for the weaknesses in your defenses, Eli. I tried to intimidate you. I needed to keep you off balance so you'd never guess how scared I really was." Eli gently reached out and took her hand. "And I used logic as my shield," he confessed, his voice just as quiet. "I thought if I could analyze everything, I wouldn't have to feel any of it." Caith turned his hand over, weaving her fingers through his. "I don't want the armor anymore," she said. "Not with you. I just want this. Tenderness without a strategy, without some hidden angle." She met his gaze, her expression so open and vulnerable it made his heart ache. "Is that even allowed for people like us?" she asked. A real, tired, happy smile spread across Eli's face. "I think it's required," he said, leaning closer. "Wanting something doesn't scare me anymore, Caith," he whispered. "Because this is honest." And then he kissed her. It was nothing like the desperate, frantic kiss back on the station. This was slow, deliberate. A whole conversation without a single word, It tasted like peace. Keith sighed against his lips, her entire body finally relaxing into his embrace. The ship hummed around them, the walls glowing a soft, warm gold. "You make me braver, Eli Ward," she murmured against his mouth. "And you make me real, Keith." A week later, their ship, the Resonance, was docked at a neutral outpost on the very edge of the frontier. Eli was at the airlock, loading a crate of supplies, while Keith was busy checking the hull's integrity. A message pinged on Eli's datapad. It bore the official seal of the new Joint Council, addressed to envoys Ward and Keith. The message was short and sweet. "Your request has been approved. You are hereby assigned the dismantle and audit mission for all remaining Balance Authority outposts in the Outer Rim. You are granted full autonomous jurisdiction." Eli couldn't stop the grin that spread across his face. He looked up and saw Keith hanging upside down from a support strut, inspecting a vent. "Hey, envoy!" Eli called out. Keith dropped to the deck, landing as lightly as a cat. She smirked. "I think I prefer Ambassador with a very large blade," she retorted. "We got the job," Eli said, holding out the datapad. Keith read the message, and a look of deep satisfaction settled on her face. "So," she said, "we're going to clean up their mess. And we're going to do it our way," Eli added. "No more secrets. No more cages." They climbed back into the cockpit, and the Resonance seemed to hum to life, as if it could sense their new purpose. The engines thrummed with anticipation. Keith slid into the pilot's seat and looked over at Eli. "Ready for another impossible run?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with that old, familiar thrill, but this time it was tempered with a deep warmth. Eli strapped himself in. He looked out at the endless sea of stars, then at the woman who had terrified him, challenged him, and ultimately saved him. "I'm not running," he said. "I'm flying." Keith let out a laugh, a sound that was pure freedom. "Better watch out, Galaxy," she whispered with a grin. "Here we come." The ship lunged forward, becoming a streak of light against the infinite dark, aimed straight for a future that was sure to be messy, dangerous, and completely their own.